Okay. Alrighty. Good evening, good morning, Jai Bhim, everybody. Um, Thank you all for joining today. And we are here to listen from our very talented, very committed Dr. P. Vikramaditya Sairam about Babasaheb and specifically about Babasaheb's writings and his take on how Babasaheb spread his message. So just I want to give you a brief introduction about the event. This is being organized and hosted by Ambedkar International Center, USA. And this event started as a bunch of organic conversations between our volunteers, and then we connected with Dr. Sairam, and then we thought, why not have the community at large listen and learn from Dr. Sairam's experiences, from his immense knowledge, and we can then spread, because that's all what Babasaheb told us, right? To spread the message, to learn and then disseminate knowledge. Few days ago, I happened to have a phone call, an introductory phone call with Dr. Sairam, and I was very pleasantly surprised knowing about his journey. So he is a dentist by profession, and while working as a dentist in India, he 7 years ago got exposed to the Ambedkar literature, and he went really deep, learning about Babasaheb, about Mahatma Phule, and he evolved as an Ambedkar scholar um, over time. And what's really interesting with him is his passion to go deep into the topic, to go deeper than most people, was very striking to me. So he told me that he read and learned that Mahatma Phule had more than 300 books in his library. And just look at the curiosity of Dr. Sairam. He wanted to know what were those books? What were those books that Mahatma Phule himself read back in those times? And obviously, in today's era, uh, it's very hard to look for those books in the titles. So he started reading Mahatma Phule himself. Some of the books' names he glanced and gleaned from Mahatma Phule's own writings. Then he went to Pune and retraced a majority of the books in his library and the titles. And then he wrote about it. So his articles about Mahatma Phule, about Babasaheb, about Babasaheb's personal life, they're available on Roundtable. I'll post the links for those articles in the chat. And I wanted to bring this up just as a little brief, that look at the curiosity of the man. He read about a few things and then asked himself, okay, well, he had all these books in his library. Can we know about those books? And just because of that, he went down on a path of deep research. And the fruits of that research are for the entire Ambedkarite community at large um, to read. So without any further ado, I'll hand over the call to Dr. P. Vikramaditya Sairam. He is a gem of our community. He is a gem of an Ambedkar community. He is a dentist by profession again, and a scholar and a researcher. So please welcome Dr. Sairam. Over to you, Dr. Sairam.
Thank you, Sandeep Bhai. And am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandeep Bhai, for that wonderful introduction. And at the very outset, I'd like to thank Cheran sir, Prashant Bhai, Sandeep Bhai, Anil sir, and the team of PAWS, Dr. Ambedkar International Center, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to present this session. And I would also like to thank each and everyone for taking the time to attend this session. So before beginning the session, I'd like to say something that, I'm not very good, when it comes to these presentations. So if I make any mistake or if I fumble in the middle, please excuse me. So with that introduction, I'd like to begin the presentation. So are you able to see the PPT?
Yes, we are.
Okay, amazing. So the title of the topic is an overview of the books written by Dr. Ambedkar. Let us come to the introduction. Dr. Ambedkar was a prolific writer. No other leader in India has produced anywhere close to the voluminous writings that he did. In his entire life, he has written more than 22 books and monographs that were completed, and also written more than 30 books that he left unfinished. And besides writing these books, Dr. Ambedkar had also written path-breaking research papers, more than 10 path-breaking research papers, and he's written thousands of articles in his Marathi fortnightly newspapers like Muk Nayak, Bahishkrit Bharat, Janata, and so on. So clearly, even a full-time scholar dedicating his or her life entirely to research cannot come close to these immense writings of Dr. Ambedkar. And it's very important to understand the writings of Dr. Ambedkar in the context, because if you observe his life impartially, we'll understand that he's always been preoccupied in building socio-economic movements and also the political movements. He began his political life as an MLC, a member of Bombay Legislative Council. Then he became an MLA, after 1937 elections. In the British government, he worked as a labor minister and initiated so many reforms, which we'll see in the next slides. After independence, he was a law minister who took care of the piloting of the Indian Constitution. After that, he resigned from the law ministry and then again, worked as an MP from the Rajya Sabha till his death. So you can see he's very preoccupied with his social and political movements. But despite being preoccupied and immersed in all these activities, he took the time to read more than 50,000 books and had written a multitude of books, articles, research papers, and many other things. At this context, we need to very make a distinction. Like, this was not the case with other contemporary leaders of the time, like Gandhi or Nehru, because, they had a huge caste networks, they had huge immeasurable support, from industrial giants and press. So that's not the case with Babasaheb. So he had to struggle not only with, the British people, but also with the communities in India to establish the dignity for countless millions. So this is my classification of his books. Different people might have different approaches. So as you can see here, he had written books on economics, he had written books on law and politics, history, anthropology, and sociology, and also comparative religion. Many people do not know that Dr. Ambedkar was an extraordinary authority on comparative religion. He studied all the religions of the world for nearly 35 years. So with that expertise, he has written all these books. So if you can see this slide, there are nearly 20 books. So even if we take 5 minutes discussing, each book, it will take nearly 1 hour, 20 minutes and so on. So, I'll stick to the time limit and try to give a brief summary of most of these books. And as I said, he has written books on all these human disciplines with an unparalleled expertise. That is why, to use the words of Robert Ingersoll, great American thinker, Dr. Ambedkar was like an intellectual ocean whose waves touched every shore of human thought. You can see the magnanimity of his thought process and his expertise on different subjects. So we'll understand the life of Babasaheb in different phases. So I divide his life into 5 phases, starting from 1913 till the end. So we'll see each and every phase. So coming to the first phase, that is from 1913 to 1920. So 1913, as you know, Dr. Ambedkar went to Columbia University to pursue his doctorate studies. And in the very next year itself, we see the beginning of World War I. So you can understand the conditions in which he was studying. In 1915, he finishes writing his first book for master's thesis. In 1916, he presents a very path-breaking paper in an anthropology seminar. In 1917, he finishes his PhD thesis. In 1919, he returns to India and presents a testimony before what is called as Southborough Committee. And Southborough Committee dealt with the constitutional reforms of India. So as you can see here, Dr. Ambedkar's role in the making of the Indian Constitution began in 1919 itself. It didn't begin in 1946 or 47. It began very, very, very before. It is in 1919 itself. So 1920, he launched his first Marathi bi-weekly called as Muk Nayak. As you can see, this first phase, it's mostly comprised of his educational attainments. Only in the last part of the phase, you'll see this transition to his political life. So let's go back to 1913. So 1913, what happened was Maharaja Sayajirao Gaikwad of the Baroda state. I think in this map, you can see all these yellow colored shaded areas. They belong to Baroda state. So 1913, Maharaja thought that he need to send some students to Columbia University or to foreign so that these students can learn so many things with respect to administration and they can return to India and work in his Baroda state. So when Babasaheb came to know about all these things, he met Maharaja at this Malabar Hill Palace in Bombay. And then there's a fascinating conversation between Maharaj and Babasaheb that I want to, include in this presentation. So Maharaj asked which subject young Bhim liked to study, and young Bhim replied, sociology, economics, and especially public finance. And then Maharaj asked, what will you do by studying these subjects? Then young Bhim, who was only 22 years old at the time, he said, the study of these subjects would give me clues for improving the depressed condition of my society. And I shall undertake the work of social reform on those lines. Remember, he was only 22 years old at the time. And the reason why I included this conversation is to stress this fact that the foundation of his philosophy has been well laid even before he embarked on the journey of education at Columbia or foreign universities. Because there are many people, scholars, who say that, Babasaheb learned everything only after going to foreign, but that's not the case. As you can see from this conversation, he went to Columbia with a mission. That is what I wanted to establish at the very outset. So yes, on June 4th, 1913, our young Bhim signed an agreement with the Baroda state and got a scholarship of nearly 20,000 rupees. 20,000 rupees at that time was a very huge amount. So he arrived in the New York City the third week of July 1913. Of course, as I said, this foundation has always been, well laid even before, but it got enriched and expanded under the able guidance of Professor John Dewey, who was a very preeminent philosopher at the time and a leading public intellectual, and also under the guidance of Professor Edwin Seligman, who was a very famous economist whose writings on taxation are studied even today by students of economics. Of course, we have this wonderful recent book that was written by Professor Scott Stroud that explores the intellectual connection between Babasaheb and John Dewey, and I suggest everyone to read this amazing book. So while at Columbia, Dr. Ambedkar's coursework included the following things. As you can see here, he studied in 3 years 29 courses in economics, 11 in history, 6 in sociology, 5 in philosophy, 4 in anthropology, 3 in politics, and 1 each in French and German. And as you can see here, this is why he was able to write so many books on various disciplines. So he had this foundation at Columbia. So after studying relentlessly for hours and hours in libraries, now young Bhim is now all set to begin his literary career as an author. And this is one of the pictures of Columbia University that was taken in 1915. Is one of those libraries, and Babasaheb must have definitely studied in one of these libraries. And thank Columbia for sharing this image online. So let's see the first paper that Babasaheb presented at Columbia. It is called as Castes in India, the Mechanism, Genesis and Development. He presented this paper on 9th May, and he was only 25 years when he presented this paper. Let me tell you, even today, no anthropologist or sociologist is able to explain the genesis of caste like Dr. Ambedkar. So this is the significance of this path-breaking paper. And we'll see the a brief summary of this paper. So Babasaheb begins the paper by saying that there are endogamous groups all over the world. Let us first understand what is exogamy and endogamy. If you marry outside your social group, it's called as exogamy. On the other hand, if you marry inside your own social group, it's called as endogamy. So what Babasaheb was saying is that all over the world there are endogamous people. Means they used to marry within their own social groups. So he cites the case of USA and says the endogamous groups in the USA, like Negroes and the whites, and the various tribal groups that go by the name of American Indians in the United States, are heterogeneous from the beginning. So he says that whites, blacks, and various indigenous tribes, they were all in endogamous from the beginning. They used to marry only, within their group. But in India, that is not the case. He says the people of India form a homogeneous group. The various races of India occupying different territories have more or less fused into one another and do possess cultural unity. That is exogamy. What Babasaheb was trying to say is that in ancient India, we have so many social groups. There is no denial of that fact. But these social groups followed exogamy. That means they used to practice marrying outside the social group. That was a unique feature of ancient India. Praising ancient India, he says, ethnically all people are heterogeneous. People come from different places, different continents, but it is the unity of culture that is the basis of homogeneity. Babasaheb says, taking this for granted, I venture to say that there is no country that can rival the Indian peninsula with respect to the unity of its culture. It has not only a geographic unity, but it has over and above all a deeper and much more fundamental unity, the indubitable culture unity that covers the land from end to end. And when Babasaheb is speaking about this culture, it is called as exogamy. But this is the tragedy. But it is because of this homogeneity that caste becomes so difficult a problem to explain. Because caste is a parceling of an already homogeneous unit. And the explanation of the genesis of caste is the explanation of this process of person. What Babasaheb was trying to say is that, as you can see, in the ancient times, in the beginning, we have so many social groups practicing exogamy. But this culture, over a period of time, got transformed into endogamous groups. This transformation is taking place in ancient India, and this is the tragedy, as mentioned by Babasaheb. So Babasaheb says, caste in India means an artificial chopping off of the population into fixed and definite units, each one prevented from fusing into another through the custom of endogamy. Caste is a superposition of endogamy on exogamy. Many people, many research scholars, many thinkers, whenever they refer to this paper, they say that Babasaheb defined caste as endogamy. But that's not the case. He says the unique feature of India is that this custom of endogamy was imposed on those people who used to practice exogamy. This is the unique feature of caste system. That is a superposition of endogamy on exogamy. That's the unique feature. So that is what I wanted to say about the paper because many people get these things wrong. And again, it's a summary, so you need to read the paper on your own to understand how caste system got, spread or disseminated into different parts of subcontinent. You have to read the paper, and it's just a summary. Now you might ask, what is the significance of Dr. Baker as an anthropologist? What is the relevance of his thoughts and ideas in modern day times? Recently, there is this fascinating book written by Professor Abhijit Guha, who wrote this book called as Nation Building in Indian Anthropology. He was referring to the paper of Babasaheb Ambedkar, which we just discussed, and he said it was full of critical scholarship on caste in a lucid and argumentative fashion. This exemplary work of Dr. Ambedkar was never mentioned or referred to by the world-renowned scholars in caste in India. Take, for example, J.S. Gure is from Maharashtra, very famous one. So in his famous book Caste and Class in India, Gure mentions the name of Dr. Ambedkar only once on page 226, and that too as the leader of the scheduled caste. Dr. Ambedkar is still, unfortunately, a nobody, the syllabi of anthropology. So what does it tell? It tells it's a testimony to the omnipresence of caste system that even in today's India, the extraordinary contributions of Babasaheb are not widely recognized. This is what we need to remember. And one more point, and as reminded by my friend Bhavya, who said that, we don't need any validation from any scholars to add value to writings of Babasaheb. But I'm quoting the works of these scholars because there's this propaganda that his works, they're not received well by the scholars. So in order to dispel that propaganda, I'm quoting the, words of these authors. That's it. So now let us see the journey of Babasaheb to earn his masters and PhD degrees. Initially, during the phase of 1913 to 15, he planned to write a master's thesis on a topic called as ancient Indian commerce. But we don't know the reasons he switched to a different topic. So in 1915, he wrote a completely different, thesis for his master's. It's called as Administration and Finance of the East India Company. In 1917, he wrote his PhD thesis called as The Evolution of Provincial Finance in British India. You'll see a brief summary of each and every book in the coming slides. So let us see the first thesis called Initial Thesis of Babasaheb, and it is called as Ancient Indian Commerce. It's a fascinating book. It's only 75 pages, but if you read the book, you'll get fascinated because the kind of references that Babasaheb quoted or cited in this book is really pathbreaking. Can't even imagine. You have to read the book. Then
Doctor,
only we'll understand.
sorry to interrupt, Dr. Sairam.
Yeah,
There is a, as you're sharing a slide, there's a black bar that's appearing for us as audience on the screen, so we cannot see the top horizontal section of the slide. Uh,
correct. I was actually asking my friends
yeah,
before how to remove this bar. So I don't know how to remove this bar. So is there a way to remove this bar? Because I'm not that technically sound. So
yeah,
Can you try to slide it on the right or left? See if it can go up. Yeah, now
yeah,
it's good.
yeah, now we're good. Thank you.
okay, but when I see the slide, it is appearing in the middle. So it is obstructing to my presentation.
Right now it's not there.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, then it's fine.
yep.
So okay, sorry for the interruption. So yeah, this is his initial thesis. It's called as Ancient Indian Commerce. It's only 75 pages, but it's a fascinating book. Oh, I don't know what is this line. So anyway, so Dr. Ambedkar begins this interesting book by saying that there were in existence three well-established routes by which spices from India used to reach Europe, and they are known as northern, middle, and the southern routes. So just remember that there were three routes, out of which the southern route is a sea route. So the land routes were devious and dangerous. Robbers plundered the merchants. The southern route, which was for most part a sea route, was equally unsafe. Why? Because the storms of the Indian Ocean in surges and water were very, very dangerous. So you can see here, it's a picture of an ocean. So the storms of these oceans were very devastating. So the trade was very difficult. But despite all these things, with all these impediments, with all these difficulties, Eastern products nevertheless arrived in considerable quantities and were available to the European merchants. So as you can see here, along with these spices, a lot of animals, birds, everything is, transported in those vessels or ships. And Dr. Ambedkar also mentions a very interesting thing. It's called as the influence of ancient Indian trade and Tamil on Greek language. It's a very fascinating one, let us see. So Babasaheb begins by saying, culture in all times follows the wake of commerce. The commercial intercourse of India with Greece has left its impress upon the language of the two trading people. Thus, the Greek name for rice, that is oriza, ginger, gingiber, and cinnamon, kapia, have a close correspondence with their Tamil equivalents, that is arisi, inchur, and karava. It was Greek merchants who conveyed these things and articles and their names to Europe from Tamil Nadu. What Babasaheb was saying is that whenever we hear these words, say for example, oriza, gingiber, and kapia, we think that these are original Greek words. But Babasaheb proves with an extraordinary historical evidence that these words were not originally Greek, they were originally Tamil. So these Greek merchants translated the original Tamil words into the Greek language and popularized them in the European states. So this is how, the ancient Indian trade and Tamil language has influenced the European languages. There is a very fascinating connection that Babasaheb speaks. So as you can see here, this is one of the part to what is called a southern route, which we have just discussed. So which is a sea route. So as you can see here, it begins here, fleeing the modern day Tamil Nadu, goes all the way into the Indian Ocean and then goes here into this Red Sea, always in use, be it in ancient, medieval, or modern times, always in use. So from Red Sea, it goes to its Mediterranean Sea, and then from here, it reaches all parts of Europe. Now, all these trade routes, whatever we were discussing, north and middle and southern, unfortunately, all these trade routes were blocked. What happened was, in 1453, Constantinople, which is the modern days Istanbul, fell to the Turks. This upheaval of the Turks and the Mongols completely blocked the land and sea routes. So, as we saw in the last picture, this was the sea route, right? So this was blocked. And many other routes were also blocked because the Constantinople was occupied by the Turks. So this compelled the European nations to discover a new sea route to India, which was finally done by Vasco da Gama, who reached Calicut in 1498. Now this is the new sea route. So when these old routes were blocked, the Europeans were so, they were compelled to discover a new sea route. That Vasco da Gama came all the way from Portugal, crossed African continent, and then reached Calicut. Now, what was the origin of this eagerness to reach the Indies? Why did Portuguese, English, French, Dutch meet with one another in centuries of strenuous effort to find a sea route to India? Babasaheb says the object was to obtain luxuries and particularly spices, chilies, cloves, etc., which could be had only from India and the East. Now, you might say, you might ask, this seems rather strange that all this run should be for spices. But the fact is that spices did play a very important role in the expansion of Europe. And then Babasaheb cites a striking example of John Ball to convey how the possession of spices came to be treated as a class marker. So then Dr. Ambedkar writes, John Ball wished to draw a contrast between the lords and the peasants. John Ball said, they have wines, referring to the upper class people of England. They have wines, spices, and fine bread, when they have only rye and the refuse of the straw. So you can see here, this is the significance of spices. That is why these people came to India, because spices played a very important role in the life of medieval and modern India. Now, having come to trade with the Eastern Indies, these European nations remained there to conquer it. So this is the famous painting of Vasco da Gama reaching to the court of Zamorin of Calicut, which is made by Eloso Salgado. So just a quick summary of whatever we have seen so far. So we began by, seeing that there were three ancient routes, northern, Midland, southern. Southern is a sea route. And we also saw that these routes were blocked in 1453. Then a new sea route was discovered by Portuguese, particularly Vasco da Gama. And then we see the arrival of Portuguese followed by other European nations. And England as a nation came in 1608. So far, this is the sequence in which things are going on. Now let us come to the main master's thesis and PhD thesis that Dr. Ambedkar. So his master's thesis was Administration Finance of the East India Company. His PhD thesis was Evolution of Provincial Finance in British India. Both of these books are so closely connected that I wanted to present them together. So let us see. So in these books, Babasaheb provides a historical review of the changes in the administration and finances of the East India Company starting from 1792. He was doing this research in 1913, so he goes way back to 1792 by digging all the old books to find what has happened in the past. This is a fascinating thing. So we know that East India Company was founded by a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I on December 31st, 1600. So in 1615, there's a person called Sir Thomas Roe. He reached out to the court of Jahangir, paid Farmer to establish a factory at Surat. So this man is Sir Thomas Roe. He went and met Jahangir. He asked permissions to open his factories in different seaports of India. And this, so this Jahangir whom we see here and the Salim played by Dilip Kumar and Mughal Azam are both the same people. So just wanted to give that context. And while Salim was busy with Narkali, parallelly the East India Company started doing all their business across the country. That's why it's very important to be diligent. So yeah, there's one of the earliest pictures of East India Company. And East India Company's factory that was opened at Bombay in 1665. Although the British came to India in the name of trade, we know these facts that they soon waged wars with Indian kings and queens and assumed control over the subcontinent. As the British expanded its control over the rest of the country, there were two questions that they wanted to deal. First of all, the question of revenue. Second, how to collect this revenue. So it's a very big questions for them. And the collection of revenue in British India was characterized by injurious taxes and reckless expenditure. To find the roots of these financial investors, Babasaheb makes an analysis of the finances of the government going as far back as 1792. Let us see his analysis of the British India, the financial loot, and many other things. As you know, in a budget, there are broadly two aspects. So on one hand, you collect the revenue from the people, then you try to, use this expenditure for the same purpose. So it's a basic thing. You collect money, you also spend the money for the public. So what about the revenue collection part? Speaking about it, Babasaheb says, the revenue system as prevailed under the imperial regime was a cruel satire, or at best an idle maxim, because the land tax was the heaviest impost of the imperial revenue system in operation. He gives you this amazing data collected by referring to thousands of books. And he says that, this table or chart, it deals with the ratio of land revenue collected to the total revenue. As you can see in this picture, the average for 64 years was around 54. So out of 154% is only the land tax. You can imagine the kind of economic pressure the British had put on the normal masses. At one time, it even went 66%. You can imagine the kind of extraordinary or enormous degree of pressures on the common people. You might think maybe this land tax was also collected from the rich classes or the zamindars of the then Indian subcontinent. But Babasaheb says the landlords who passed their lives in conspicuous consumption on the earnings of poor tenants, but the many European civil servants who fattened themselves on pay and pickings were supremely exempted from any contributions towards the maintenance of the government. On the other hand, salt tax, the moturfa tax, and the other oppressive taxes continue to harass the industrious poor. So all these taxes ultimately harm the common mass and not the zamindars of the rich classes. They lived happily. And small note on moturfa tax. It's a very interesting word. Babasaheb says that it's a tax on trades and occupations, embracing weavers, carpenters, all workers in metals, all salesmen, and even vendors by the roadside. Even vendors by the roadsides were not paid by the British government in their process of looting the country. This is what we need to remember. It's a very disastrous thing, and Babasaheb explains all these things in a very detailed manner. We have to see the book. Okay, you have collected the money by harassing the people by collecting so much of land revenue now. But the real question is, did you at least spend that money for the welfare of these poor people from whom you have collected this tax? This is the main question. In making the analysis of expenditure, Babasaheb says, Dr. Ambedkar analyzes the distribution of government expenditure during the period 1809 to 1857 and he concludes by saying, we find the unparalleled fact of a country wasting between 52 and 80% of its precious little money on war service. So you collected money by harassing the people, causing a huge distress in their lives. But you again spend that money on the war services, which are completely unrelated to the normal lives of people. This is the extraordinary loot. Then Babasaheb says, railways, canals for navigation or irrigation, other aids to the development of commerce and industry, for the long term, found no corner in the imperial budget. And then he also gives a very interesting fact, because there were some European economists who said that, the expenditure went to the military people. And they also said that most of the Indians, were in the military. So maybe they also got benefited. But Babasaheb damages that argument or demolishes that argument by saying, after the total strength of 2,70,119 in 1857, Indians number 2,31,374 in the army. As you can see, Indians are the majority in the army. But this excessive military expenditure did not benefit Indians in the army because the scales of salaries for the Europeans and the natives were so grossly unequal that one European driv on an average more than the salaries of 4 natives put together. So where is the positive result to even these Indians who are in the army? So this is the extraordinary degree of depth to which Babasaheb goes. He demolishes all the arguments of his opponents in the book step by step with so much of data and unparalleled expertise. So he concludes by saying, so this expenditure, whether from the standpoint of public utility or private employment, did not benefit the population, which contributed to the revenues of the state. And he also gives a very interesting fact. He says that, as you know, this is the city of Manchester in the United Kingdom. Babasaheb says that the single city of Manchester has spent a larger sum of money than the East India Company has spent in the 14 years, from 1834 to 48, in public works of every kind throughout the whole of its domain. So the money that was spent by Manchester for its public utility is more than the entire amount spent by East India Company for 14 years in this entire subcontinent. So you can understand the kind of reckless expenditure that the British were engaged in. So Babasaheb says the wealth of the society is the only patrimony on which the state can draw. The state that damages it cannot end but in damning itself. So British have destroyed the Indian state by looting all the things. One important thing that I wanted to say before proceeding, whenever we read these things about the economic loot of the British, people refer to people like, R.C. Dutt, Dadabhai Navroji, economic drain theory, and so on. But have you ever heard people referring to Babasaheb? Because when you compare the writings of R.C. Dutt or Dadabhai Navroji or anyone with the writings of Babasaheb, you'll see the degree of depth to which he made analysis with the financial loot of the British system. But no one refers to these books. So you can understand the reason why all these things happen. It's the caste system and the stain of untouchability. So again, that this is a very unsound financial system. The revenue was collected recklessly, the expenditure was reckless. So naturally, the entire financial system will collapse. So the British tried different methods like budget by assignment, budget by assigned revenues, budget by shared revenues. Many methods were tried, but ultimately they did not do any good to the people. So Babasaheb makes an in-depth analysis of all these things and concludes that British have done nothing to the Indian common people. Only the Zamindars and rich classes have benefited from the British rule. And it is reported that Babasaheb referred to more than 6,000 books. I don't think in our own lifetime we can even read 1,000 books. Maybe I'm creating few people who read more books, but still referring to 6,000 books for a PhD degree is not an ordinary human task. And Babasaheb referred to more than 6,000 books, thousands of old documents connected to East India Company, the British government, the Parliament debates to finish his speech thesis. If you read that book, he cites so many debates for the Parliament, starting from Warren Hastings to William Bentinck and many people. You'll be fascinated. It's not a book on economics. It's mostly about history. And you'll be fascinated. If you love history, you'll get fascinated. Yeah, so I said the same point. So speaking about the significance of this book, what did Dr. Ambedkar's professor, Dr. Edwin Seligman, he says that the value of Mr. Ambedkar's contribution to this discussion lies in the impartial analysis of the interesting development that has taken place in his native country. The lessons are applicable to other countries as well. This is very important. Nowhere, to my knowledge, has such a detailed study of the underlying principles been made. This is the significance of Dr. Ambedkar's PhD work. You might say, some people might ask, Babasaheb wrote this book in 1970. What is the significance or relevance in modern day? So is it relevant? So I want to quote the words of Dr. Narendra Jadhav, who is also a very prominent economist. So he says, while the role of Finance Commission is widely recognized, most people seem to be unaware of the fact that the analytical foundation of the Finance Commission reports is derived from Dr. Ambedkar's Evolution of Provincial Finance in British India. You know that there is something called a Finance Commission whose task is to give a report about the evolution of funds from union to different states. So Narendra Jadhav sir, who worked in RBI and other economic institutions, tells us that even Finance Commission follows this book of Babasaheb while writing its report. That is his relevance, but how many of us heard these things? All these things are hidden. So, yeah. Now, let us come to the second phase. This is from 1921 to 1930. So, 1922, Dr. Ambedkar was called to the bar by Grayson and he becomes a barrister at law. He was an unchallenged lawyer. In 1923, he publishes his second PhD thesis called Problem with Rupee. You know, no one has two PhDs in economics. And Babasaheb has two PhDs in economics. And in fact, he also wanted to get third PhD in economics from Bonn University in Germany. But unfortunately, owing to financial difficulties, he returns to India. But had he gone to Bonn, he would have done third PhD. So that was his commitment to, or his love for economics. So 1924, Dr. Ambedkar establishes his first social organization called as Bahishkrit Hitkani Sabha. It's also the same year in which Indus Valley was discovered. So just wanted to give that context in which all these things are happening parallelly. So 1925, he presents a testimony before Hilton Young Commission that led to the formation of Reserve Bank of India. In 1927, he gets nominated as the member of Mumbai Province Legislative Council. He launches the massive movement of Mahat Satyagraha, the public burning of Manusmriti, and the launches, this fascinating new bi-weekly called as Bahishkrit Bharat. 1930, he launches a new Marathi bi-weekly again, it's called as Jinnah, and attends the first roundtable conference. We'll see all these things briefly. So this is a very interesting letter that I found recently, which I thought I need to quote here. So his college professor, Herbert Foxwell, he was a professor at London School of Economics. So in 1920, what happened was Professor Seligman, who was Dr. Ambedkar's teacher at Columbia, he wrote a letter to Professor Herbert Foxwell, this person, who's teaching at London School of Economics, recommending Dr. Ambedkar. So this professor read the education attainments of Dr. Ambedkar and made this comment. He said, I find he has already taken his doctor's degree and has come only here to finish his research. There are no more worlds for him to conquer. He has conquered everything already. There is nothing left to conquer. Why did he even come? But again, Babasaheb, starts his research and finishes his second PhD or DSc. So this is the level of commitment he had to the study of economics. As I said, in 1922, Dr. Ambedkar qualifies as a barrister and becomes an unchallenged lawyer in the history of India. So let us see briefly about his PhD thesis. It's a very complicated book actually because it deals with concepts of currency and all the technical aspects. I'm not an economist, but in my own small knowledge, I try to give a brief summary. So if there are any mistakes, please excuse me. So in this book, Dr. Ambedkar offers an excellent exposition of the evolution of the Indian currency. Unlike the literature on currency then available, Babasaheb Ambedkar goes into the most neglected period, extending from 1800 to 1893. Again, he takes a century-long period. He doesn't like small work. He wants everything to be very big in terms of research and everything. So now he's set to challenge the great economists of his time, like John Maynard Keynes. We'll see that debate in the coming slides. So what is the story of currency in India now? So Babasaheb begins by saying that at the close of Mughal Empire, the money of India consisted of both gold and silver. So the southern India, which mostly had Hindu kings at the time, they used to follow this gold pagoda. The currency was gold in South India because the kings were Hindus. On the other hand, in the North India, most of the kings were Muslims at that time. So they followed a different currency and it's a silver currency. So we need to remember this difference. In South, it's gold. In North, it's the silver. And the interesting fact is that the silver currency was minted at different sites. As you can see at Lahore, Agra, Allahabad, Kandar, Ahmedabad, in different areas, these coins were minted. But there's no problem because all these coins stick to the same standard of weight, that is 175 grams. So there's no problem. Most part of the subcontinent follow the same currency. There is no problem. But as we know that Mughal Empire got destroyed or disintegrated, and we see the rise of new kingdoms. Say, for example, Hyderabad, which emerged in 1724. We see the Maratha state, we see the rise of Bengal, over the different states. What happened was, previously you have this single uniform currency all across subcontinent. But now with the emergence of new kingdoms, each kingdom began to issue their own new currency. Ultimately, what happened was we ended up in a situation of bewildering in multiple currencies. So previously we had either gold in the south or north or silver in the north, but now we face a situation where there is a bewildering multiplicity for all these coins. And the situation is very drastic because the entire trade was reduced to barter. I'll just give a small example to explain the significance. Say, for example, I'm from Maharashtra and I follow a different currency. You are from Tamil Nadu, let's assume, and you also have a different currency. If I want to sell poha from Maharashtra to Tamil people, how can I do it? Because our currencies are so different. How will the transaction happen if we follow two different currencies? Ultimately, what will happen? The entire economic system will collapse and the entire trade was reduced to barter. Again, you need to read the book originally to understand the complexity and the extent of this damage because everywhere there are new coins. Full confusion. Previously, only one coin. Now there's so many coins. And poor people were defrauded because there were these middlemen money lenders who used to tell poor people that whatever coins that you are giving are not original coins. They're fake coins. So in this manner, poor people were looted again by money lenders and middlemen. And it's a very complex thing. And Babasaheb explains all these things in detail in this amazing book. Please see the book. So then, when British came to India, they realized that this is a very chaotic situation. Everywhere there's multiplicity of currencies, and everywhere people are literally stuck in this economic system. So what they did was they replaced this bewildering economic systems, currencies, with a new currency. Now it's a single silver coin. So this is how the currency has evolved over a period of time. It's a very lengthy topic. I'm just confining to basic points. Now, Europeans, particularly British people, thought everything is no good. They have replaced the currencies with silver. There is no problem. But here begins the trouble because in India, you're collecting money or tax from the people in the form of silver currency. But ultimately, your boss who lives in UK or in England follows the gold currency. So whatever payments that you're collecting in form of silver have to be transformed into gold to make the payments. And again, whenever you have two different currencies, there's something called as exchange rate disparity. Say, for example, $1 is not equal to 1 rupee. In today's time, I saw it some time ago, $1 is equal to 83 rupees. So in always, in between two different currencies, there's something called as exchange rate disparity. In the same case, in the same sense, even there is an exchange rate disparity between this silver rupee and also the gold coin. This is the problem, and this is how the entire things unfolded in the British period. And Babasaheb plays games with all these concepts in his books. So Babasaheb says, England being a gold standard country, the government of India's payment to England on account of maintenance of European troops, interest on debt, and the like had to be made in gold. But the revenues of the government of India, out of which these payments were met, were received in silver, we just said. As such, the burden on the government of India increased. Now let us see a hypothetical case. I'm just simplifying the thing so that people can understand. Let's assume in a normal case, you require 4 silver coins to buy 1 gold coin. And let us call this stable value of the rupee. 4 coins, you will get 1 gold coin. In this case of stable exchange rate between silver rupee and the gold, what will the government do? They will cut the tax like 4 coins for 1 gold rupee. This taxation is still exploitative. I'm just giving a small example. Now, what if the case is worse? And this is the case in most part of the India's history. In most part of the India's history, the value of the rupee has always been low. So in this case, what happens is that when the value of the rupee falls down, you need more coins to buy the very same single gold coin. See the contrast. In the first case, When everything is normal, when the exchange rate is stable, you just need 4 coins for one gold coin. Now, when the rupee value is down, you need more silver coins to get the very same gold coin. In this case of unstable exchange rate between silver, rupee, and gold, there will be high taxation, more collection of money from the people. That translates to unmitigated loot and rigid economy in the finances of the government. And what is the consequence, or what are the consequences of this exchange rate disparity? First is high taxation. We have seen it just now. What is the second most important consequence? Before going to that, we will see how this exchange rate disparity has contributed to the loot of the Indian people. Babasaheb provides this extraordinary chart. Again, this chart is not available. I mean, he did not collect this chart from any random book. He actually compiled all these data by referring to thousands of books. I wanted to just stress that fact. So you can see here, during the phase of 1882 1881,
Sorry,
the British.
sorry, Dr. Sairam, that this bar, this horizontal silver bar is back on the screen again. Is it possible to push it down?
Yeah, but actually, I've been trying to, eliminate this thing, but I don't know how to do it. That's why I was asking, before the session.
There is some suggestion. Vijay, can you please chime in? Or maybe somebody can read from Vijay's.
No, yeah, it's. Can you try to stop sharing and reshare again?
I've done it 2 to 3 times, and every way it's coming again. Okay, let us try one more time.
Yeah, just move it to the
So,
output
sorry
screen.
to all the friends. I'll just take 1 minute and I'll come back. See, this thing comes again. Are you able to see it now? Or has it disappeared?
It's still there. Can you try to drag it to the bottom of the screen if possible?
It's not going.
Okay, that's fine. We can continue then.
Okay. I'm really sorry for this trouble. So coming back to the study. So yeah, we were discussing about the exchange rate disparity. So in case of unstable, exchange rate, the government collects so much of money. So what is that exact amount of? Babasaheb gives you the figure. So during the period 1880 to 1881, the British government has collected more than 3 crores of rupees. This is not a normal tax. This extra money is collected to balance this exchange rate disparity. And again, if you see the period during 1891 to 92, government has collected more than 10 crores to just balance this exchange rate disparity. So speaking about it, Babasaheb says, all this additional burden was due to the enhanced cost of meeting the gold payments and would not have been necessary but for the fall in this exchange. So, did anyone imagine that this exchange rate disparity has contributed to so much of the loot from the British government? And Babasaheb goes in depth in making an analysis of all these things. So, as I said, the first consequence of this rupee and gold or sterling exchange disparity is high taxation. The second consequence is the worsening of famines. Before going to understand the consequence of it, let's understand what it was to live under the conditions of famine. So for that, I need to quote Savitribai's letter that she had written to Mahatma Jyotiba Phule in 1877. So let us read her letter. So Savitribai begins by saying, the year 1876 has gone, but the famine has not. It stays in most horrendous form here. The people are dying, the animals are dying, falling on the ground. There is severe scarcity of food, no fodder for animals. The people are forced to leave their villages. Some are selling their children, their young girls, and leaving the villages. Rivers, brooks, and tanks have completely dried up. No water to drink. Trees are drying, no leaves on trees. Barren land is cracked everywhere. The sun is scorching, blistering. The people crying for food and water are falling on the ground to die. Some are eating poisonous fruits and drinking their own urine to quench their thirst. They cry for food and drink, and then they die. This is the horrific situation in which people lived during the famines, and I just wanted to quote Savitribai to give that picture. So, how is this rupee sterling exchange disparity contributed to more famines? We'll see that. Let's take a normal scenario. In normal scenario, what happens? There's a stable exchange rate. So people living in England, particularly their investors, they would show so much of enthusiasm to invest their money or capital in industries in India to get high returns. There will be more industries and diversification of industries, and there will be a shift of large sections of people who are engaged in agriculture to these industries. And this can lead to a reduction in poverty. This is a normal flowchart which many people suggest. But as Babasaheb says, the scenario where there is an exchange rate disparity, it has always been the case in India. What happened was there's always been this unstable exchange rate between rupee and sterling. Naturally, the English investors viewed investing in India as a risky proposition because it was feared that once the capital was spread out in a silver country, every fall in the price of silver would not only make the return uncertain when drawn in gold, but would also reduce the capital value of his investment in terms of simply saying, if you invest in a country where there's a different currency in which currency's value has always been low, you won't get high returns. That's what the point is suggesting. So there is no investment, no capital inflow, no development and diversification of industries, and unfortunately, large sections of people, large sections of masses continue to remain in the unpredictable agriculture sector. That's why we see this extreme and widespread poverty in India even today. Even after independence, we did not see this transformation from agriculture to industrialization. Even today, I think most people know 40 to 45%, or even 50% according to few figures, 50% of Indian laborers are still stuck in agriculture. How can a country develop? So this has been the case even in the past. I'm just trying to connect the dots. So that's why Babasaheb says one of the avenues to escape from the ravages of recurring famines to which India so pitifully succumbed at such frequent intervals was diversification of industries. We have seen the points before. To be of any permanent benefit, such diversified industrial life depends upon the flow of capital into the country as freely as the needs of the country require. But as we saw, there's always been this rupture of the exchange rate and people scared to invest in India. That is why this check to the free inflow of capital was undoubtedly the most serious evil arising out of the rupture of the power of exchange. So we knew that there were famines in India. We knew that there was loot in British India. But what were the factors in play? And Babasaheb explains all these things in detail. So I know it might sound boring to few people, but it's a very, very important, significant book that speaks so much about the history, economic history, political history of British India. And what were the solutions offered by Dr. Ambedkar to manage the situation? He said, isn't it logical that see, you are collecting money in the form of silver and then paying the money to UK or England in gold? How is it even logical? So he says, abandon the silver thing and go to this gold standard. Abandon all these silver currencies and switch to this gold one. And he also suggests many other technical details. So if I explain these things, it will take so much of time. So I'm just skipping it. To read the book, you'll understand it's a very good book. So in this process, Dr. Ambedkar, changed his words with no less a person than John Maynard Keynes, who was considered a very famous economist of his time, and even today people refer to him. So Professor John Keynes said that India should follow what is called as gold standard. But Babasaheb said John Keynes is wrong. We need to follow what is called as gold standard in a modified form. Again, if you want to understand the difference between gold standard in modified form, you need to read the book. It's a very technical subject, but you have to see it. Something very interesting. You might have noticed or seen this boy, the movie Narnia, and this boy is actually related to Professor Keynes. And Keynes was also part of this very famous literary group called as Bloomsburg, of which Virginia Woolf, as you can see here, was also part. So I just wanted to connect. So the book, Problem of the Rupee, which we have discussed so far, was republished in 1945 as History of Indian Currency and Bank. It is volume 1. Babasaheb thought to publish a new volume, covering the updates from 1923 to 1947, but unfortunately he could not do it. Let me share you one interesting fact that was, shared with me by my friend. So he is Professor H.T. Price. He's a very famous economist of Germany. So when Professor H.T. Price wrote his German-English economic dictionary, he referred to Dr. Ambedkar's The Problem of the Rupee for defining the Indian currency of rupee. So this is that picture from the dictionary. So as you can see here, this is the entry point, name, rupee, and here's the reference of Dr. Ambedkar's book. And I thank my friend Nikhil Bagade for sharing this precious information. Thank you, bye. So let's move to the next slide. Today we are no longer living in the age of coins and currency alone. We're witnessing a gradual shift towards the path-breaking technologies and developments like blockchain, cryptocurrency, and so on. So, in this context, we need to understand these changes that is happening in our age. Our age is sometimes defined as surveillance capitalism, limbic capitalism, etc., etc. So, in this context, we need to revisit the economic writings of Dr. Ambedkar and see how extraordinary his words were, his words of wisdom were. And to understand some of these new changes in our times, we need to read good books. And I'm very happy to suggest this wonderful, famous Marathi book written by my friend Gaurav Somamshi. It's in Marathi. It's going to be released in English also. So I suggest my friends to check this amazing book. So let's come to this topic of significance of Dr. Ambedkar as an economist. We'll see what was the significance. As we know, when Hilton Young Commission came to India, after the Great Depression and all. So they were searching for some solutions so that they could manage the, disastrous economy of British. So then Babasaheb met Hilton Young Commission. He presented his book, The Problem of the Rupee, and also written a fresh statement of evidence. And they were so convinced with the knowledge of Babasaheb that they said, we need to do something. So Babasaheb suggested to create a centralized bank. And they followed his suggestions and created this Reserve Bank. So you can say that Reserve Bank is the brainchild of Dr. Ambedkar. So that was his extraordinary practical contributions to the economy. And naturally, Nobel laureates were very impressed with him. So Gunnar Riddles, who was a very famous economist, he said, all over the world, the memory of Dr. Ambedkar will live forever as a truly great Indian in a generation that laid down the direction of independent India. Of course, we also have our Ramacha Sen from India who said, Dr. Ambedkar is the father of my economics. So this is the significance of Dr. Ambedkar as an economist. But the unfortunate fact is, even today, his contributions to economics, both theoretical and practical, were not acknowledged by the people, by scholars and other ones. What is the reason for that? We need to ask, and we know the reason. Now let us move to the third phase, that is from 1931 to 1940. Now the economics part is over. So we'll understand the third phase. So in 1931, Dr. Ambedkar attends the Second Roundtable Conference and attracts a global audience. In 1932, he signs the Pune Pact owing to the blackmail from Gandhi. In 1934, he gets elected as the president of Bombay Municipal Employees Union. He's a very, very powerful labor leader. In the coming slides, we'll see a part of that. And in 1935, he gets appointed as the principal of Government College, Bombay. And unfortunately, his wife Bombay also passes away in the same year. This very same year, Dr. Ambedkar declares his decision to leave Hinduism at the Dola Conference. The very next year, 1936, he forms his Independent Labour Party, publishes Annihilation of Caste. In 1937, he tops the provincial elections to the Bombay Legislative Assembly, launches mass movement against the Kode system and the Mahatma. In 1939, World War II begins. He publishes Federation versus Freedom. In 1940, there was this striking resolution at Lahore demanding the creation of Pakistan. The very same year, Dr. Ambedkar writes this path-breaking, fascinating book called Thoughts on Pakistan, which was again republished as Pakistan and Partition of India. The reason why I'm sharing this brief timeline is that we need to understand the context in which he had written all these books. He was not living in isolation and reading the books and writing the books. As I said in the beginning, he was very, very preoccupied with social and political movements, as you can see in this timeline. Despite being preoccupied, he was writing so many books on so many disciplines of human study. That is what I wanted to stress. So, of course, we have these roundtable conferences on 1932. What happened was in 1928, we heard about the Simon Commission that came to India to suggest some reforms in the constitution, but it got failed. So when Prime Minister of UK at the time, Ramsay MacDonald, realized that Simon Commission did not work, he thought, let us bring all the delegates to one place in London and try to solve this constitutional crisis. So this is the birth of roundtable conferences at London. And in these conferences, Dr. Ambedkar had emerged not only as the unchallenged leader of millions of depressed classes, but also as the unparalleled authority on constitutional law. If you read some of the speeches written by these delegates on Dr. Ambedkar, you get surprised. He attracted each and every person. They were spellbound. Who is this man? What is this extraordinary degree, an enormous degree of knowledge? So, yes. One more interesting picture. It's a rare picture. I thank my friend Phil Bagare for sharing this wonderful picture with me. This was Babasaheb, before boarding on a ship to London. So yeah. But all the people who attended the conferences were spellbound with the speeches of Babasaheb. There was one individual who took the greatest pride in witnessing the speech of Babasaheb, and he was none other than Maharaja Sayajirao. He attended the conference, the first roundtable conference, and he witnessed the speech of Babasaheb, and he felt so proud of himself that he encouraged this extraordinary young talent. And Maharaja's joy was so boundless that he hosted a special dinner party to Dr. Ambedkar at Hyde Park Dormitory. And it became a huge sensation at the time, and the New York Times covered this incident with this following title. Again, I thank my friend Nikhil for sharing this amazing finding. Interestingly, Maharaja was one of those lucky individuals who witnessed the speeches of both Mahatma Phule and Dr. Ambedkar. Many people don't know this, but Mahatma Phule was very close to Maharaja Sayajirao. In fact, Mahatma Phule went to Sayajirao Gaikwad's palace and narrated the entire book of Shetkara Chasud. I think I pronounced it rightly. In English, it's called Cultivator's Web. And Maharaja was so impressed with the writings of Phule that he considered him as one of his inspirations. So, as I said, Maharaja was one of those lucky individuals who witnessed speeches of both Mahatma Phule and also Babasaheb. There's a very interesting connection. So, yes, let's move to 1936. As we know, 1936 marks the publication of Annihilation of Caste, and it's a path-breaking work. I think this is also one of the widely read works of Babasaheb. Most people have heard about this book, if not read it actually. So, I don't want to discuss this book in detail because it's a widely read book, but I wanted to share a small excerpt from that book, which has relevance today. Of course, entire speech has relevance, but I'm just saying a part of it. So Babasaheb says, caste system came into being long after the different races of India had commingled in blood and culture. What racial difference is there between the Brahmin of the Punjab, the Chamar of the Punjab? What racial difference is there between the Brahmin of the Madras and the Pariah of the Madras? Babasaheb says, the Brahmin of the Punjab is racially of the same stock. It's very important. Is racially of the same stock as the Chamar of the Punjab. The Brahmin of Madras is of the same race as the Pariah of the Madras. Caste system does not demarcate racial division. Caste system is a social division of people of the same race. The reason why I quoted this important excerpt, because nowadays we hear all this, I may say so, utter nonsense of caste genetics, that people belonging to one caste has a different genes, people belonging to untouchable communities have a different genes. It's rubbish. Genes don't encode for social reality. Caste system is a social structure. It's a social problem. There's no correlation between genes and social problems. All these people who are writing this nonsense, saying that untouchables have different genes, Brahmins have different genes, they are just imitating the nonsense of the West, particularly which is called as race genetics. All these theories were debunked by people like Richard Levant and Stephen Jay Gould, but still, these people are propagating these views. So it's a common sense. If you read this book of Babasaheb, you don't need to have any degree in genetics. He has a basic question. If each caste is separate, each caste has a separate genetic basis, how is it that people belonging to different castes look similar, given in a particular region? I repeat this again. The Brahmin of the Punjab is racially of the same stock as the Chamar of the Punjab. And the Brahmin of the Madras is the same race as the Pariah of the Madras. If every caste has same different genetic lineage, everyone should look same. Like Brahmin of North India and South India must look same, but they're very dissimilar. Same case with untouchables. So please don't believe in this caste genetics or race genetics. It's a nonsense which I just wanted to highlight. So see how relevant are the words of Babasaheb, that we can debunk all these modern theories with the speech that he has given in 1936. That is the significance of Babasaheb Ambedkar. So yes, in 1939 he writes this fascinating, it's actually a speech. It got published with some small altercations, and it is called as Federation versus Freedom. It's a top-class lecture on the Government of India Act 1935. As we have just seen before, there were 3 roundtable conferences, right? 1930, 31, and 32. And the culmination of all these conferences led to the formulation of Government of India Act. So Babasaheb's role was there, even the making of Government of India Act. That is what I wanted to stress. He gives a very interesting lecture on this Government of India Act, and he speaks about the Federation, Union, many other things. And please read that speech. Small speech, but it's a fascinating speech. Let's move to 1940. And in 1940, as you know, in Lahore, you Muslims met and passed a resolution that they want a separate country, and it is called as Pakistan Resolution or the Lahore Resolution of 1940. And Babasaheb was following all these incidents. So in just 1 year, he had written a whole fat volume on that topic, which was published as Pakistan or Partition of India in the second edition, but the first edition was Thoughts in Pakistan. And this book was dedicated to Dr. Ambedkar's wife, Ramai. It's a fascinating and a moving and touching dedication that he had written to his deceased wife. And he said, inscribed to the memory of Ramu, as a token of my appreciation for goodness of heart, her nobility of mind, and her purity of character, and also for the cool fortitude and readiness to suffer along with me, which she showed in those friendless days of want and worries which fell to her lot. This is such a moving dedication of Babasaheb to Raman. And I'll just take 1 minute to say one interesting fact here. Babasaheb was never able to recover from the loss of Raman. We have so many accounts of different people, followers of Babasaheb, repeating the same thing. There was this very extraordinary PhD student called Namdev Nimgade. At that time, he was a PhD student. He was a very great scholar. He met Babasaheb. He saw Babasaheb crying in 1955, thinking about Raman. So Babasaheb says that he tried everything in his limits. He made all the efforts to save her. He got injections, tablets. He even planned to go to America at the time, for the quality treatment. So Babasaheb cried in front of all the people. He was stuck in the emotions, and he said, "I tried everything, but she slipped." So he could not recover from that shock. And I just wanted to say that was his unfathomable love for Ramai. I just wanted to say that. So this is the dashing picture of Babasaheb where he was discussing about the issue of Pakistan. Speaking about this book, Pakistan at Partition, Babasaheb says, the book has displeased both Hindus as well as the Muslims, though the reasons for the dislike of the Hindus are different from the reasons for the dislike of the Muslims. I'm not sorry for this reception given to my book. That it is disowned by the Hindus and unowned by the Muslims is to me the best evidence that it has the vices of neither, and that from the point of view of independence of thought and fearless presentation of facts, the book is not a party production. This is the fascinating introduction which Dr. Ambedkar gives in Pakistan and Partition book. Nowadays, what is happening? We see everyone trying to quote selected passages from this book to foster their agenda or anything. But when it was released, it was disowned and unknown by both Hindus and Muslims. Now both are quoting this book selectively for their propaganda. So, and I thank Prakash Dubey sir for sharing this dashing image of Babasaheb. And if you remember, there is this famous quote of Babasaheb that those who do not know history cannot make history. And actually, Babasaheb said that quote in this speech, the picture of which I'm just showing it to you. So, this was the map shared by Babasaheb in that book. And briefly, if I want to say, as you can see, these green color shaded areas are the Muslim dominated areas, and these dark orange color, they are the Hindu majority areas. So the demand was that the green color shaded areas must be constituted into separate countries. So if you read the book, Dr. Ambedkar interestingly gives two cases. So in one case, he says why partition is wrong. In the second case, he says why partition is right. So he doesn't give us opinion. He presents both the cases, and it is the author is the reader who need to read the book and form his or her own opinion. That's the fascinating part of Babasaheb. And as you can see here, he begins by saying why Pakistan should be there, and then he says why there should be no Pakistan. And then what if not Pakistan? You will be surprised with the range of references that Babasaheb gives in this book. And this book is also very famous for one more reason, because if you see in general, there are some people who criticize one religion and they will spare the other. That's what happens in most cases. But Babasaheb was that rare intellectual who has this intellectual honesty and moral superiority to criticize what is wrong in both Hinduism and Islam. People criticize either one religion and spare the other, but he is the only intellectual who has his guts to say what is wrong in both these religions. So that was Babasaheb with extraordinary moral integrity. And what is the significance of this book, Partition of Pakistan or Partition of India? So I found this very interesting remark by this amazing professor who says that Ambedkar alone was early on clear-sighted enough to see that self-determination could not be denied to Muslims if they wanted it, and to propose a rational solution for it. So if a religious community says that we want a separate state, and the demand is very strong, you can't ignore it. That's what Babasaheb tried to say. Then, in 1944, at a time when the very idea of it was taboo in Congress, and still little more than a vague slogan in the Muslim League itself, he published the only serious work on the issue which would determine the outcome of the struggle for independence. Pakistan, a partition of India, whose references range from Renan to Acton to Carson, Canada to Ireland to Switzerland, stands as a devastating indictment of the intellectual poverty of Congress and its leader. This was Perry Anderson for you, sharing this extraordinary remark about Pakistan and partition. It's a very interesting remark because we have this Congress party which is very dominating at that time. It has this wide social base from north to south, east to west, and everything. But when this issue came up, the question of Pakistan or any partition of India, no one from these huge base of Congress has even produced a single pamphlet. They say they're very meritorious, but unfortunately, we're not able to see their merit. But on the other hand, Babasaheb was able to write this extraordinary fat volume on Pakistan. As I said, the reference was very, very huge. That was the extraordinary spirit of Babasaheb and his in-depth academic research that went into the process. And initially it was published as Thoughts in Pakistan. Again, it was republished in 1945 as Pakistan and Partition of India, in which Dr. Ambedkar gives his views on partition. So what is the solution of Babasaheb? Did he support partition or did he not support the partition? The answer is he supported partition. You read the book, you'll understand why he did so. He wanted partition, but he wanted it to be managed very diligently. But when Jawaharlal Nehru is the Prime Minister, we cannot expect any good things because he did not do well. So let's move to the next phase, 1941 to 46. So 1942, the Quit India movement begins. Dr. Ambedkar, the very same year, becomes Labour Minister, the Viceroy's Executive Council. And this Viceroy's Executive Council is the highest governing body of British India. So then in the very same year, he heads important portfolios like labour and employment, energy, minerals and water management, women empowerment, and many other things. The very same year, he launches his All India Scheduled Caste Federation Party. In the very next year, he delivers his famous speech called Ranade, Gandhi and Jinnah, and also publishes Mr. Gandhi and the Emancipation of the Untouchables. In 1945, he founded his education institution called as People's Education Society. The very same year, he publishes his book called as What Congress and Gandhi Have Done to the Untouchables. It also brings the second edition of Pakistan, a partition of India. And we see that in 1945, the World War II has ended. So then it brings a lot of chaos in the Indian political scenario. Now that the World War II has ended, what is the future of India? So it's a very turbulent phase for India and also for Babasaheb. We'll see that. So in 1946, the Viceroy Executive Council, of which Babasaheb was a member, was dissolved. And there was a formation of caretaker government by the Congress Party, and they excluded Babasaheb from that. And he launched an all India protest against both British and the Congress government. He founded Siddharth College in the very same year, published Shudras. And in 1946, we also had the elections to the Constituent Assembly, and Babasaheb contested and lost from Bombay. And we know from many records that Congress Party spent a large amount of money to defeat Babasaheb. But Babasaheb was not that, he was not budge to this, tactics. He had different plans. So finally, despite getting defeated by the shameless tricks of Congress Party at the time, enters the Constituent Assembly from Bengal with the help of Yogendra Mandal, an amazing follower of Babasaheb, also an extraordinary intellectual and a lawmaker. Again, as I said, if you look at this time chart or timeline from 42 to 46, so many events were there. But I actually selected only very few important things. So many things were going on, but if you see this slide, despite being preoccupied in all these activities, he published so many books, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 books in this phase, despite being preoccupied. This is what I wanted to again stress. In 1942, Dr. Ambedkar had this dilemma. To use his own words, I wanted to quote him only. He says, in 1942, I had to face two questions. One was to serve as a High Court judge, and the other was to join the Government of India as a member of the Viceroy's Executive Council. Had I joined the High Court, I would have received rupees 5,000 per mensem as pay and rupees 1,000 as pension after retirement. But I did not do that. I entered politics. He says with an emotional tone that got birth in a truth community, the untouchable community, die for my community. The cause of my community is supreme to me. So Babasaheb sacrificed everything. Could have become High Court judge and lived a lavish life. But he said, I want to enter the politics so that I could do something for my people. He says that he came to politics for untouchables, but if you see his life, he has done good for every section of community, which we'll see in the coming slides. So in 1942, Dr. Ambedkar joins the Viceroy's Executive Council. He is Lord Wavell, he's a Viceroy, military commander, and many other people. And there's this myth that Dr. Ambedkar is the only Indian in the Viceroy Council, but that's not the case. You can see there's some Indian faces here from South and other places. So he joined the government for the good of the people. That is why Babasaheb is considered as a maker of modern. Why? I'll tell you. It was during this period, 1942-46, that for the first time, with the leadership of Dr. Ambedkar, the Labour, Irrigation and Power Department formulated a policy for planned development of irrigation and electric power resources in the country on a comprehensive all-India scale. Truly, Babasaheb laid the foundation of modern India even before our country became India. That is why he is the real maker of modern. And we'll see his contributions, a brief summary of it, because his contributions as a Labour Minister was so extensive, we can't reach with in this presentation. Even if you take 2 hours, it won't be sufficient. Say, for example, we'll see briefly a few things. Dr. Ambedkar water policy. The planning on the part of Dr. Ambedkar in the Labour Department led to some basic developments, which laid down the foundation of India's water policy. This is the lovely picture of Damodar River Valley project. So Dr. Ambedkar played a very important role in the formation of Central Waterways, which is a high-level technical organization, Irrigation and Navigation Commission, which is now considered as Central Water Commission, and he played a very important role in the adoption of the concept of River Valley Authority, the first time in India to manage the affairs of project on interstate rivers. Even today, we speak all these things of interlinking of the rivers, interstate projects. So Dr. Ambedkar spoke about all these things way back in 1942. And of course, he played a very important role in formulating the policies of Damodar and Yerakud multipurpose river valley projects. And as I said, this is the picture of Damodar River Valley project. Let us see his contributions in electric power plant. I'll just go briefly because it's so extensive. So when Dr. Ambedkar took the Labour portfolio, there was hardly any all India policy on production, distribution, and administration of electricity. So he had to begin everything. He had to start the foundations of electric power planning in India. So Babasaheb played a very important role in establishment of Central Technical Power Board, now called as Central Electrical Authority of India. He laid the foundation for this development of grid system, following or getting inspired from the grid system of UK. And it was crucial in the establishment of Power Supply Department, formulation of electrical power policy, both in 43 and 45. You can say, look at these contributions in water policy, electrical power policy. All these things were happening before independence. As I said, that is why the real maker of modern India. Now, I'll just share a very important excerpt from a book of Babasaheb. So he was very enthusiastic to get this electricity for the rest of the country. Why was he so enthusiastic? So Babasaheb used the reply. He says, why do we want cheap and abundant electricity in India? The answer is that without cheap and abundant electricity, no effort for the industrialization of India can succeed. Why is industrialization necessary? We want industrialization in India as the surest means to rescue the people from the eternal cycle of poverty in which they are caught. Nobody needs to be told that India is primarily an agriculture country. Everybody knows it. What is surprising is that very few people seem to realize what a great misfortune it is. Agriculture is a misfortune. Why? Because I know this will not be readily admitted. What more evidence is wanted to prove that this is a misfortune than the famine which is stalking Bengal and other parts of India, in which so many from the agriculture population are dying daily from want of food or from want of purchasing power. The poverty of India, to my mind, is due entirely to its being made dependent upon agriculture. Industrialization alone can drain away the excess of population to gainful occupations other than agriculture. I'm sorry, this might be a lengthy quote, but I wanted to quote it because this was his vision for India. As I said in the previous slides, see, there's a continuity in the thought process of Babasaheb Ambedkar. As a student, he wrote his thesis in economics saying that famines were there in India because there was no industrialization. So when the opportunity came, when he became the law minister, he was determined to transform the landscape of India by bringing more industries, by supplying cheap electricity so that more and more people who got stuck in the agriculture can come out of it, come out of this eternal vicious cycle, then join industries, different types of industries, so that they could get some form of employment. That was the vision of Babasaheb. And that's why he has taken so much of care to do all these things. But unfortunately, all these things stopped in 1947 because when Nehru became Prime Minister, he had a different team of economists who suggested a disastrous plan and not criticizing for criticism's sake. If you read the books, even fans of Nehru like Amartya Sen criticizes Nehru because he could not handle this thing. He did not pay any attention to industrialization. That is why even today in India, 40 to 45% of people are still engaged in agriculture. So see the vision of Babasaheb Ambedkar and how things were transformed, unfortunately, in the wrong direction. So if Dr. Ambedkar was made the chairman of the Planning Commission, initially he was promised by Nehru that besides the law ministry, will also be made as the chairman of the Planning Commission. But Nehru did not do that. He did not want Babasaheb Ambedkar to do that. Ultimately, we are now facing the disastrous consequences of that decision. So anyway, let us go to the next thing. Again, it's a very interesting quote from this famous person called Lord George Waterloo. So he shares this very interesting connection that he had with Dr. Ambedkar. So he says, when I went to India in 1946, he, Dr. Ambedkar, was a member of Viceroy's Council and was responsible for industrial matters. I was the only trade unionist on the parliamentary mission, and it is natural that I would seek him out to talk about industry and related matters. He told me that he wanted to establish a minimum wage for workers. If I told you that it was many years later that the British Labour Party embarked upon such a scheme, you would see how advanced he was in his thoughts. So you can see Babasaheb was thinking about all workers, not just scheduled caste workers. He was thinking about each and every worker, irrespective of caste or religion. That was the egalitarian vision of Babasaheb Ambedkar. But unfortunately, he's even today branded as leader of untouchable community. He's undoubtedly the tallest leader of untouchable community, but his contributions were for all Indians. That's what I wanted to stress. You can see the comments of this person in this video. So yeah. Again, there were many other contributions of Babasaheb as a labor minister. As you can see here, he is the one who got this maternity benefit leave for women, and he reduced the working hours from 40 to DNS allowance, ESI, many other things are there. You can refer to this fascinating book of Professor Sukhdev Thakur, and I really salute to Professor Sukhdev Thakur because the kind of research that he has done is truly unparalleled, and I pay my respects and tributes to him. And I wish he brings more and more books so that people can learn from his knowledge. Thank you, sir. So, yes. And these are the images of Babasaheb with the Labour Commissioner discussing about employment exchange. Again, employment exchange. It was Babasaheb's role. And this is another fascinating image where Babasaheb was speaking to the laborers who were working in the coal mines. Actually, Babasaheb, there was an incident where he went 400 feet underground to see the conditions of working people. And he saw some pregnant women working in that area. And this story was shared by Ramesh Shinde sir, who was a very prominent archivist of our community. So Ramesh Shinde sir once narrated the story. When Babasaheb went to this underground mines, he saw the pregnant women working in very harsh environment conditions. He was so moved by the conditions of these women that immediately after going home, he drafted a law that became the Maternity Benefit Act. Mines Maternity Benefit Act, so different from maternity benefit leave that he introduced in 1928. So that was the Karuna and Maitri of Babasaheb. So yes, now let's come back to the book. So in 1943, he publishes a very interesting book called as Ranade, Gandhi in Jinnah. It's a speech which was initially delivered in a college and later got published as a book. It's a sketching attack on both Gandhi and Jinnah. Babasaheb says, you two people, please retire. You are causing the mess to this country. You should retire. Then only India will progress. That was a very powerful take of Babasaheb on his student. I wanted to share. See, these people are always quarreling. So yes, so Babasaheb says, I am condemned because I criticized Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Jinnah, the mess they have made of Indian politics. I hate injustice, tyranny, pompousness, and humbug, and my hatred embraces all those who are guilty of them. I tender no apology for my criticism of Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Jinnah, the two men who have brought India's political progress to a standstill. Then Babasaheb says, and this message is very relevant not only to India, but also to many different parts of the world where people were just becoming blind devotees of the leaders. So Babasaheb says, our I have hopes that my countrymen will someday learn that the country is greater than the men, that the worship of Mr. Gandhi or Mr. Jinnah and service to India are two very different things and may even be contradictory of each other. This is a fascinating book, and where Babasaheb compares the life of Justice Ranade with that of Gandhi and Jinnah, and says that India is underdeveloped, India is stuck in this mess. It's because of Gandhi and Jinnah. And that was about the book. In 1943, again, the very same year, Dr. Ambedkar publishes another book called as Mr. Gandhi and the Emancipation of the Untouchables. Actually, there's a very interesting story about the genesis of this book. So there's a very interesting institute called as the Institute of Pacific Relations. It was an international NGO who wanted to promote liberal democracy throughout the world. So they invited Babasaheb, and they were like, "You please write a paper to us highlighting the issues of untouchables, so that this paper can be circulated, in the higher institutes of learning across the world." So Dr. Ambedkar was supposed to go to this lovely place called as Mount Tremblant in Quebec, Canada. But unfortunately, he could not go to that place. But he wrote this paper and sent them, which was later published as this book called as Mr. Gandhi and the Emancipation of Untouchables. In this book, Dr. Ambedkar deals about the question of untouchability, compares it with that of blacks of America and the Jews of, the Germany. And Babasaheb says, my fear is that the problem of the untouchables will be forgotten as it has been so far. That would indeed be a calamity. For the ills which the untouchables are suffering, if they're not as much advertised as those of Jews, not less real. The world owes a duty to the untouchables as it does to all the suppressed people to break their shackles and to set them free. I accepted the invitation to write this paper because I felt that it was the best opportunity to draw the attention of the world to this problem, in comparison to which the problem of the slaves, the Negroes, and the Jews is nothing. And Babasaheb was not actually belittling the sufferings of blacks, Negroes, or Jews. What he was trying to say that the condition of untouchables is 1,000 times worse than of all these people. You need to actually read these works of Babasaheb to understand why he's saying all these things. People on superficial level might think that he is belittling the struggles of other people. That's not the case. He presents you with evidence as to how untouchability is 1,000 times worse than slavery as it existed in Rome or in America, or the sufferings of Jews in Germany. So this was the efforts of Dr. Ambedkar to present the original case of untouchability to the global world. And please read that book. It has a fascinating details about the problem of untouchability in a very step-by-step manner. Yes, in 1945, there comes a very powerful, path-breaking book. It's called as What Congress and Gandhi Have Done to the Untouchables. So this was written actually to dispel the myth that Congress and Gandhi are the true representatives of untouchables. So it has been repeated ad nauseum again and again that the Congress is the only party, Gandhi is the only leader of untouchables. That Gandhi is the savior. So you people should stop cherishing Babasaheb and start celebrating Gandhi. That was the context. But Babasaheb writes this book and challenges the moral authority of Congress and Gandhi, claim themselves as the champions of untouchables. He gives you extraordinary evidences starting from 1919 till 1945 to show how Gandhi and Congress have done nothing to the untouchables. Though they claim that they are doing some extraordinary work, in reality it is nothing. So Babasaheb says that for Tilak Fund, which was fund for political activism, they collected crores of money. But for the emancipation of untouchables, they could not even collect thousands of rupees. And even those thousands of rupees were not spent for the untouchables. So he demolishes the entire majestic figure of Gandhi that he was able to create so far. And Gandhi was not able to recover from that blow from Dr. Ambedkar. That is why you see the significance of this book. Ramchandra Goa, who is considered as a very powerful authority on Gandhi, has written actually these words in his book, Gandhi, the Years That Changed the World. He says, in truth, although Gandhi was by now quite accustomed to Ambedkar's attacks, this latest assault had shaken him. He worried that it might erode the credibility of the Congress, already undermined by the growth of Muslims. Ramchandra Goa was a bit modest in saying all the things, but in reality, Gandhi was shaken 1,000 times severely because of this attack. And that is why, on 2nd April 1946, the Secretary of State for India told Lord Wavell, who was the Viceroy, that he had received a letter from Gandhi making 3 immediate demands. And those demands were release of all the detainees, those who are detained in the jails. Second, abolition of salt tax. Third, dismissal of Dr. Ambedkar. And I know there are some people who will ask the reference. I'm citing the reference for you. You can see the reference. I'm citing 2 books for you. So this is the level of grudge that Gandhi had, Dr. Ambedkar, that he wanted Dr. Ambedkar to be out of the Viceroy Council. And we have just seen the contributions of Dr. Ambedkar in the Labour Ministry. He was doing fascinating things, water supply, power, engineering, everything. But Gandhi was very adamant to remove Babasaheb from that extraordinary post, so you could understand the reasons. He was shaken by this book. And now we come to 1946, when Babasaheb wrote this path-breaking, original, incisive analysis of the ancient India. It's called as Shudras, and he rightly dedicated it to Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, his guru. As you know, Dr. Ambedkar considered 3 people as his gurus. First of all, Gautam Buddha, the legendary. Second, Kabir, and third, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule. And writing in the dedication part, Babasaheb says, inscribed to the memory of Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, the greatest Shudra of modern India, who made the lower classes of Hindus conscious of their slavery to the higher classes, who preached the gospel that for India, social democracy was more vital than independence from foreign rule. Here's Babasaheb saying, equating Mahatma Phule as a social democrat. What do we see in the modern research scholars? They were like, Mahatma Phule was a gardener. He was a Mali. So all these words were used in a sense of contempt. But for Babasaheb Ambedkar, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule was his guru. He was a social democrat. And let us see a brief summary of that book. And I'm trying to use some small diagrams so that I can make things simplified. Because this is, I think, one of those books where many people get things wrong, completely wrong. I've read, I'm not boasting, but I've read some books where even the good scholars got things right. So I wanted to clarify those things here. So Babasaheb begins the book by saying that initially there were only 3 varnas: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, with subdivisions or subclasses inside each varna. See this picture: the 3 circles, the 3 varnas, Brahmins with their own social classes, Kshatriyas with their own social classes, and Vaishyas with their own social classes. Now the second one, Shudras as a class were initially part of Kshatriya varna. So this red colored circle that was highlighted, this is called as Shudras. And they're originally part of Kshatriya varna. They were not a different category or different varna. These people who go by the name Shudras were originally Kshatriyas and they're part of Kshatriya varna. I hope I'm clear. Now, there was a continuous feud between the Shudra kings and the Brahmins, in which the Brahmins were subjected to many tyrannies and injuries. They were subjected to harassment. So, as you can see, Brahmins as a whole group were subjected to difficulties by one particular social group within the Kshatriya varna, which is called as Shudras. I think it is clear so far. Let's come to the next one. As a result of the hatred towards the Shudras generated by the tyrannies and oppressions, the Brahmins refused to perform the Upanayana to the Shudras. So what happened later? Owing to the denial of Upanayana, or the white thread, sacred thread, the Shudras who were Kshatriyas, right? They were part of this one. They became socially degraded and fell below the rank of Vaishyas and thus came to form the 4th varna. So many people even today repeat the same thing, that there were 4 varnas in the ancient society from the beginning. But Babasaheb says, sorry, you are all wrong. Initially, there were only 3 varnas. Right? Shudras were originally Kshatriyas, but they fought with Brahmins and they fell down to the social ladder and became a new varna, which is the 4th varna. Hope I'm clear so far? Let's go to the next slide. This is the most important part. This is where people get. Babasaheb makes a distinction between Shudras of Indo-Aryan society and Shudras of Hindu society. Let's see what that is. First, I will quote what Babasaheb says, and then I will show you the diagrams. So that it becomes a bit easy. So Babasaheb says, the Shudras of the Indo-Aryan society in course of time became so degraded as a consequence of the severity of the Brahminical laws that they really came to occupy a very low state in public life. 2 consequences followed from this. One consequence was a change in the connotation of the word Shudra. Then, the word Shudra lost its original meaning of being the name of a particular community and became a general name for low-class people without civilization without culture, without respect, and without position. The second consequence was that the widening of the meaning of the word Shudra brought in its train the widening of the application of the code. Let me simplify it in the diagrammatic way so that it becomes easy. So, as we have just seen in the previous slide, whatever we are discussing, the four Varna system, it applied or it was prevalent only in the Indo-Aryan society, not across India, because Indo-Aryan society was just a small part of the huge Gangetic Plain. It's a small part of the geographical area. It's not entire India. So entire India in the beginning did not become suddenly four Varnas. So there was only one small pocket of area that was operating in the north. So what happened was, so as you can see in the second picture, so in the top we have this four Varna system operating in the Indo-Aryan society. So in the rest of the subcontinent, we have so many social groups, right, parallelly living at the same time. So in one part of the country in North India along the Gangetic region, we have a society following Indo-Aryan society, Indo-Aryan culture. At the same time, parallelly, you also have so many social groups in Indian subcontinent living at the time. They were not yet affected by the Varna system. That's what I wanted to say. Later, what happened was, all these people, all these social groups who have no connection with the Varna system, have no connection with the framework of that society, got clubbed forcefully or all the means possible into this fourth Varna. And that is why all these people got clubbed into this category. And unfortunately, even these social groups came to be referred to as Shudras. Let us read the quote again, and I think now it becomes clear. So the Shudras of the Indo-Aryan society, course of time became so degraded as a consequence of the severity of the Brahminical laws that they really came to occupy a very low state in public life. So Babasaheb was referring to these people, these Shudras of Indo-Aryan society. They became so low. What happened later? Babasaheb says two consequences followed from this. One consequence was a change in the connotation of the word Shudra. The word Shudra lost its original meaning of being the name of a particular community and became a general name for a low-class people without civilization, without culture, without respect. So what Babasaheb was saying was that initially the word Shudra applied only to this people, this highlighted red group. But over a period of time, all these different social groups were brought within the framework of the Shudra Varna. And this is the tragedy. And Babasaheb says, the second consequence was that the widening of the meaning of the word Shudra brought in its train the widening of the application of code. What Babasaheb was saying is, these Shudras were subjected to many harassments. And even these people who are not originally Shudras, but who are forced to include in the Shudra category, were also subjected to the same tyrannies. So, to simplify, all these social groups, before bringing into the template of Varna system, they must have had their own cultures, own identities, right? So in this process of extending the Varna culture to the rest of the country, this is what happened. Identities of these social groups were erased, their histories obfuscated, and humanity robbed. That is why even today, if you look at the caste-wise histories of different castes in India, they begin by saying that they were part of the Varna system, they were Shudras or Kshatriyas in the beginning. But before becoming the part of Varna system, they had their own histories, but they were lost to us. This is the tragedy. Hope I conveyed it rightly. So let us see what Babasaheb says. So Babasaheb says, it is in this way that the so-called Shudras of the present day, these people, it is in this way that the so-called Shudras of the present day have become the subject of the code, though they're not Shudras in the original sense. Because if you remember, original Shudras were that red highlighted group, not these people. But these people were also made as Shudras. Be that as it may, the fact remains that the code intended for the original culprits has come to be applied to the innocents. Then he says, if the Hindu lawgivers had enough historical sense to realize that the original Shudras were different from the present-day low-class people, this tragedy, this massacre of innocents would have been avoided. The fact, however unfortunate it may be, is that the code is applied to the present-day Shudras in the same rigorous manner which it was applied to the original Shudras. This is the tragedy, this is the thing. And people belonging to Shudra communities or present-day backward classes must read this book to understand how their identities were erased, their histories obfuscated, and their humanity robbed. And Babasaheb's book is an eye-opener to all the people. And he had written this book primarily for the Shudras of modern day. So yes, it's a small joke. I don't know if it will crack or not, but I'll just say So Indo-Aryans calling diverse sects of masses as Shudras after erasing their native histories be like, "Tu Shudra hai, तेरे को पता नहीं है, लेकिन तू है." So you are a Shudra, you don't know that, but you are a Shudra, something like that. So anyway, let us see the significance of this book for Shudras. This is a very interesting thing now. There are many people who repeat this thing that Dr. Ambedkar was not a Sanskrit scholar, he could not handle the original text, so and so. And they also say that Sanskrit scholars did not welcome this book. But I'll show thousands of references where Sanskrit scholars also welcome the book because the book is really fascinating. I'll cite only one example. That was of A.P. Karmakar. And this person was a very famous Sanskrit scholar and again, professor of Indology at R.D. Bhandarkar College in Maharashtra. He wrote this review in 1946 only, the year in which the book was published. So he was so anxious to read the book. He wrote this review the very year it was published. So A.P. Karmakar says, without entering into the other problems, we might say that the author has really done an eminent service in the field of scholarship. While referring to the problem of Sudasa as being Sudra, the author has rightly thrown light on one of the elite warrior tribes of India. To understand what this Sudasa and Sudra are, you need to read it. Again, he says, concludingly, he says, however, the present work of the learned servant deserves to be read and reread again and again. It is a brilliant analysis coming from the pen of an eminent scholar of the time. The people who were saying, who were crying that Babasaheb could not handle all the things, should read these reviews. Again, as I said in the beginning, I'm not quoting all these views of scholars to validate the writings of Babasaheb. We know the birth of Babasaheb's writings. They're 1,000 times superior than all of these people. But I'm quoting the commentaries of these authors because I wanted to dispel this propaganda that these books, have not been received well. So that's my only intention. So don't take me wrong. So let's come to the last phase. I don't know how much time I've taken. I'm really sorry. I'm going to finish the entire thing in just 10 to 15 minutes. Please bear me for 10 minutes. Let's come to the last phase, 1947 to 56. It's a very turbulent phase in the life of Babasaheb. So let's see. In 1947, India becomes independent and partition of Indian subcontinent happens. The very same year, he left the Constituent Assembly as the place where he was elected became part of Pakistan. So as we know, as we have just seen in the previous slides, Babasaheb tried to enter the assembly from Bombay. The Congress party spent so much of money to ensure his defeat. Then what Babasaheb did was, he entered the Constituent Assembly from East Pakistan or today's Bangladesh with the help of Jogedar Mandal. So in 1947, so from 1946 to 47, he was in the Constituent Assembly from East Bengal. But 1947, when the partition happened, place from which he got elected went into Pakistan. So now technically he can't enter the assembly because the seat was in Pakistan. So there was this chaos. And the Congress felt very happy that now Dr. Ambedkar is not there. We can do anything with the constitution, but they could not do anything. So Constituent Assembly functions unsuccessfully for attendance with Dr. Ambedkar. They realized very soon that without this man, we cannot do anything. And if you read the very interesting letter from Sardar Patel, he says that only Dr. Ambedkar can do it. So all the Congress candidates must support him. You should not cry. Don't worry. He should do the work because none of us can do. So then Congress invites Dr. Ambedkar and re-elects him to the Constituent Assembly from Bombay. So they ensure his defeat from Bombay. And when things turn around, they are the same people who request Babasaheb come to the assembly from the same place in which he got defeated by the Congress. This is the political majesty or magnanimity of Babasaheb. Again, in the very same year, he publishes his mini constitution called States and Minorities. And he gets appointed as the first law minister of independent India, and he was the chairman of the drafting committee for the new constitution. In 1948, he publishes his new book called as The Untouchables. In 1950, the constitution got enforced. And if you see this thing, 1947 to 50 is a very hectic phase for him because he was so much immersed in the writing of constitution. But if you see, even in this hectic phase, he published two books, States and Minorities, The Untouchables. It really requires a different level of greatness. I'm short of words. It really requires a different degree of knowledge or wisdom to bring these books despite preoccupied in all these hectic activities. So in 51, he resigns from the cabinet because Nehru did not want to proceed with the Hindu Code Bill and he did not do anything for the scheduled castes. But Dr. Ambedkar resigned from the law ministry in disgust and came out of it. In 52, again, Congress party, they utilized Dr. Ambedkar to frame the constitution because They know they could not do that. Once the task is done, they again show the same mentality and spend so much of money. You read the book of Dr. Savita Ambedkar, the wife of Babasaheb. She gives you so much of evidence as to how Congress spent so much of money to ensure the defeat of Babasaheb. So, but again, Babasaheb was a master political tactician. So he enters the Rajya Sabha and remains as an MP till the end. And in 1955, he publishes his Thoughts on Linguistic States, fascinating book on linguistic problems. 56, he launches his new periodical called as Prabuddha Bharat and finishes his magnum opus, The Buddha and his Dhamma, and leads the historic conversion ceremony to Buddhism at Nagpur with 7 lakh people. People say 3.54, but if you read the original speeches and all, you find that the real number is 7 lakh. No other leader in the world, no other person in the world had that command. Congress or any party can defeat Babasaheb in elections, but could you defeat him when it comes to love of people? They could not stop him. 1956, unfortunately, as we know, Babasaheb passes away on December 6th. So I'm going to finish it. I'm sorry if I'm taking it too long. So, yes, as I said, in 1947, he writes and publishes his mini constitution called the States and Minorities. He submits this book to the Constituent Assembly. And if you look at the book, it is actually written in the form of a constitution, the form of articles and clauses, so you'll understand what Babasaheb was. Now let's come to the most important book, which is called as the Untouchables. Again, I'll be using some diagrams so that to make things easy. And this book was dedicated to the memory of the great legends, Nandanar from Tamil Nadu, Ravidas. We all know Ravidas, and we all know the love of Babasaheb for Ravidas. I'll tell you one small interesting incident. There's a very famous temple of Ravidas at Delhi, and whenever Babasaheb used to visit Delhi, he used to go to the temple. If you look at the list of speeches given by Babasaheb and the location, you will see that he visited the temple at least 15 times. And that's only recorded one. We don't know how many times he visited. The number could be even more. And of course, he also dedicated the book to Chokamela from Maharashtra. And he says that these 3 renowned saints who were born among the untouchables, who by their pity and virtue won the esteem of them. So let us see this book. It might look a bit complicated, but I'll try to make it simplified. So Babasaheb says, because this book is very special in the sense that there is no available evidence of untouchability in literature or in inscriptions. So how can you trace the origins of untouchability? You have no evidence. This is a fascinating task, and Dr. Ambedkar involves in this task and says, I'm going to show you the way. And that's why he says the task of finding the origins of untouchability is one of gathering survivals of the past, placing them together and making them tell the story of their birth. The task is analogous to that of an archaeologist who constructs a city from the broken stones, or of a paleontologist who conceives an extinct animal from scattered bones and teeth, or of a painter who reads the lines of horizon, and the smallest vestiges on the slopes of the hill to make up a scene. And Babasaheb says, in this sense, the book is a work of art, even more than of history. And this is, by the way, this is a picture of my friend Jyotiba, and she is like my younger sister, and she's a very good archaeologist, and I just wanted to include her image because of the correct context. So let's go into the book. So Babasaheb begins by saying that there were 3 different types of communities in the ancient India. First is settled agriculture communities. So these are the group of communities who used to settle in a given place, and they practice agriculture, they rear the cattle, and they lead a normal life. But that's not always the case, because these settled tribes had never had this peaceful life, because they were constantly attacked by these wandering tribes. As these people had settled, these wandering tribes constantly attacked the settled agriculture communities for wealth. They plundered their agriculture produce, they harassed their women, many problems were there. So, at the same time, in the ancient society, along with these 2 communities, we have another community called as pastoral tribes. They were not completely settled, at the same time, they were not completely wandering, they were in the same state, the middle state. So, at one point of time in the history, the settled agriculture communities made a pact with the pastoral tribes that, see, we want protection from these wandering tribes. And you are in the semi-state wandering between settled and wandering states. If you give us protection, we will give you land. This was the pact. And this is how, you see, this is the structure of the village in the beginning. Now, structure of the village got transformed As you can see, this is inside the village. This is the sorry. This is the outside of the village. Again, these people who are living outside the village were not untouchables. They were just living outside the village. And you might immediately think that what is this thing? Do you think will really happen in India? If you read the book, Dr. Ambedkar cites thousands of similar cases, not only from Ireland, from ancient Europe. So if you see the book, you'll get totally convinced because the evidence is very strong. This is the starting point. So the pact was made between these settled agriculture communities and the pastoral tribes. Now let us see how this thing transformed in coming decades of the world. So in the pre-Buddhistic phase, what happened? This was the case. What happened in the pre-Buddhistic phase was the pre-Buddhistic age, animals were sacrificed a lot in ceremonies. Most of these animals are useful in agriculture, and killing them for ceremonies has affected the people economically. This is the beginning point. People, particularly the agriculture communities, depended on the animals. And when you sacrifice these animals, they're going to suffer a lot. So at that context, they needed a philosophy, needed a new faith, a new order that can emancipate them from the clutches of this suffering. And in that context, we see the rise of Buddhism, we see the rise of Gautam Buddha. And what happened was, and these yellow color shaded circles represent the Buddhist communities. So what happened in this context was, sacrifices of animals were stopped because of the rise of Buddhism. This led to mental relief for so many agricultural communities. And people both, as you can see, once again, as you can see, both inside the village and outside the village ate all kinds of meat. This is very important to remember. They ate meat of all animals. Again, people outside the village were not treated as untouchables. It's just a notional division. They can move and interchange. People from outside the village can go inside the village, or inside they can go outside. So there was this interchange or interplay of movements. There's no untouchability. Now things have begun to change. After the fall of Buddhism, what happened was people inside the village became touchables and people outside the village became untouchables. How did this thing happen? Babasaheb says sacrifices of the animals were now resumed because we no longer have this majestic sway of Buddhism over the subcontinent. Second, people inside the village ate the meat of every animal except cow. Because in this particular phase, after the fall of Buddhism, the cow has become sanctified. So people inside the village ate meat of all animals except the cow. But people outside the village continue their old age practice of eating all kinds of meat, including that of dead cow. It's very important to stress the fact dead cow because untouchables don't kill living cow. We eat only the meat of dead cow with respect. That's what Babasaheb says. Why did not the people living outside the village, stop eating the cow? Because they were Buddhists. Babasaheb says people outside the village became untouchables for eating the carcasses of an animal that is worshipped inside the village. If you read the book, you'll understand the significance of the statement. Dr. Ambedkar explains the significance of symbols in religion. He says what is very important with respect to religion. And if you read the book, you'll understand this thing. And this is how the untouched people who were living outside the village, they became untouchables because they were eating the meat of a dead animal worshipped inside the village. Babasaheb says untouchability was really a punishment for sticking to Buddhism when others had deserted it. He says, being the poorest of the poor and socially on the lowest rung of the ladder, they stuck to Buddhism the longest. It required a mighty big force exerted over a long period of years to bring them round. And nothing else would work. Social ostracism and untouchability was imposed on the entire place. This was the conclusion of Babasaheb on the origins of untouchability. If you read the book, you get mind blown by the kind of logic that Babasaheb uses to get to these conclusions. I don't know how I conveyed it, but if you read the book, I see this lecture again, you definitely find it very insightful, and I can say it confidently. So, interestingly, there was a very fascinating figure from Tamil Nadu called Jyotiba. He also came to the same conclusions as Babasaheb. Long before Babasaheb, he says that the untouchables were the real Buddhists. So you can see people coming to same conclusions, even though they were separated by different time periods and different localities. So speaking about the significance of Ayodhya, the great Buddhist leader of Tamil Nadu, Aloysius says the single individual is to be identified as responsible for the birth and growth of Tamil Buddhist movement. He is Ayodhitas, a reputed physician of the Tamil Siddha tradition, a renowned scholar of Tamil language and literature, also well versed in Pali and Sanskrit, an organizational genius and truly charismatic. After the death of Ayodhitas, Buddhism got spread to different pockets of South India, or the Madras state at the time, and it also spread to this very interesting region called as KGF, for the gold fields, owing to the efforts of people like G. Appa Duraiya. I said KGF because Babasaheb met the Buddhists of KGF. So in 1954, Babasaheb made a tour to different localities in South India and met Buddhists of these regions. So he gives you the list of places he visited and the number of people he met who were Buddhists at that time. So this is a picture shared by KGF on his page, where Babasaheb and Dr. Savita Ambedkar made the representatives of KGF people who were the Buddhist people. And yes, and there's a picture of Babasaheb Ambedkar, Dr. Savita Ambedkar with people and leaders of KGF, but also very powerful Buddhist people at the time. So during the South India tour, Babasaheb met many Buddhist communities of South India and appreciated the tenacity, hold on to Buddhism despite being hostile. And the topic of KGF comes. I'm sorry, I need to say something about this movie. I know this is out of the context, but I need to stress this. You know, this person, Paranjit, is a very powerful director, Tamil Nadu, who is a hardcore, powerful Ambedkarite. Recently made this movie called Tangaran. I don't know if you've seen it, but I request each and everyone who are living in India and in foreign countries to watch this movie. It's running in the theaters. And if you see the movie and read the works of, you see the movie, you'll understand how much this movie was inspired from the writings of Babasaheb. I don't want to reveal the plot and break that suspense. See the movie, you'll get mind blown. It deals with the writings of Babasaheb Ambedkar in a very quite open and vocal manner. And in case you want to watch the movie for the first time, you can better read this book or a particular chapter of Babasaheb. I have posted the link here. You can click the link in that. You read the small chapter of Babasaheb, which was written in a book called as Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Ancient India. And see this movie. You'll understand how powerfully Paranjit has transformed the vision of Babasaheb. Untouchables, about Buddhism, this movie. Please see that movie. So yes, coming back to it, what is the significance of this amazing path-breaking book, Babasaheb? And speaking about the same book, my friend Dr. Shubhi, who is a very powerful research scholar, she says the academic untouchability Ambedkar is condemned to by the learned becomes all the more stark when modern scholars like D.N.J. and others, with the necessity institutional support and access, often citing the exact same verses to the same secondary sources, arrive often at the near same deductions as Dr. Ambedkar, except the questions they ask and the conclusions they draw tend to be tossed. You read the article, I have posted the link, you'll understand the significance of Dr. Ambedkar's book even in 2024. After Babasaheb, many people try to touch this topic of untouchability and they have failed miserably. And it was only Babasaheb who handled this book in a very strict sense. And it's a very powerful anthropological and sociological research work that is ever done in India. That is why Professor Abhijit Guha, again I'm quoting him, he says The Untouchables, published as early as 1948, is a remarkable example of anthropological and historical scholarship, the origin and the present social condition of one of the most underprivileged sections of the Indian society. The role of Babasaheb Ambedkar in the Constitution. Just take 2 minutes to deal with this thing. Just take 10 minutes. I'm going to finish it. Don't worry. So, this is a fascinating book written by my friend Sri Anurag Bhaskar. And if you read this book, you get mind blown by the amount of research he has done. And this shows the involvement of Babasaheb, the making of the Constitution, right from 1919 till the end. So many people say that he became involved in the making of the Constitution only in the 1946. But if you read this book, you'll understand that Babasaheb was there in the making of the Constitution right from 1990. So he presents evidence before South Border Committee, the Simon Commission, he attends the roundtable conferences, was involved in the making of Government of India Act, gave speeches and written books on this topic. Federation versus Freedom, Communal Deadlock, States and Minorities. Of course, in 1946 to 50, he was involved in the making of the Constitution. He was its chief architect. And that is why it's a very interesting thing. I think people might like it. This person, was called as Justice John McMenamin. He was a retired high risk judge who served as a judge at Supreme Court of Ireland 2012 to 2020. So I was dealing with this landmark case of Ireland called as Costello versus the government of Ireland, in which it quoted Babasaheb. He says, courts sometimes resort to quotations from Madison or Jefferson. I refer instead to one of the great framers of the Indian Constitution, man who deserved to be referred to in the same breath as American framers. Dr. Ambedkar referred to the power of Indian Supreme contained in the constitution of the largest democracy in the world as being the soul of the constitution and the very heart of it. If you read this passage, there will be a striking thing in our mind. It is that in India you have some evil people. They are evil souls, evil people only. They say that Dr. Ambedkar had no role in the making of the constitution. They always do this propaganda of lies. But here is the Supreme Court judge of Ireland who is comparing Babasaheb, and he says Babasaheb must be referred to in the same breath American framers of American Constitution. Of course, the moral character of Babasaheb is 1,000 times greater than people like Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, because as we know, Jefferson was involved with slave trade and many other people. But still, the argument is that when it comes to making of Constitution, Dr. Ambedkar must be referred to in the same breath as the makers of American Constitution. And that's what he says. And then he continues the judgment and he quotes Babasaheb extensively in the judgment. And finally, he says, I would respectfully adopt the same phraseology with regard to Article 34 of Irish Constitution. There are people who say that Indian Constitution copy everything from foreign constitutions. There's nothing called as copy. He's getting inspired from the best things of the world. In the same way, this Irish judge got inspired from these words of Babasaheb. He quoted it in the judgment. That's why he says, I would respectfully adopt the same phraseology with respect to Article 34 of Ireland Constitution. So I just wanted to add this thing to highlight the significance of Dr. Ambedkar as the unchallenged authority of Indian Constitution. And I thank Dr. Donald-Coffey for sharing this valuable information online. So in 1955, Dr. Ambedkar writes this fascinating article on flood control by use of water. So far we have seen Dr. Ambedkar writing books on economics, politics and law, anthropology, sociology. But very few people know that he has actually touched even the topics of science and even to a complex topics like atomic power and nuclear science. You read this article, which was published in volume 17, you'll see that he was discussing all these things with a scientist and topics like nuclear fusion, Ohm's law of saturation, everything was discovered. This was a broad vision which Dr. Ambedkar had for India. His scientific temperament was super, no words. So that is why he was very close to the prominent scientists of that time, and he invited Homi Bhabha, who is the father of this modern atomic research in India. So Dr. Ambedkar invited Homi Bhabha to Siddharth College, and Homi Bhabha gave a lecture on the significance of science in modern India. And Dr. Ambedkar and Homi Bhabha shared a very good and cordial relationship. And that is why when in 1948, this Department of Atomic Energy was formed, Dr. Ambedkar was consulted by Homi Bhabha, and laws were formulated based on the suggestions of Dr. Ambedkar. And as we know, Homi Bhabha was a very good friend of Einstein and was regularly in touch with all of these people. So I just wanted to give this connection of Dr. Ambedkar with the scientific world. So now let's come to thoughts on linguistic states. I'm sorry, I'm going to complete the entire thing in 5 to 10 minutes. So in 1955, Babasaheb wrote this path-breaking work called as Thoughts on Linguistic States. So at that time in India, there was this controversy about creation of new states based on language. So people of Andhra demanded that they want a new state. So a new state for Andhra Pradesh was created. So that in that politically charged atmosphere, Dr. Ambedkar writes this, what you can say, scintillating book. And reading the book, Babasaheb says, what were the solutions offered by Babasaheb on the question of this linguistic states? So Dr. Ambedkar says, the idea of having a mixed state must be abandoned. That means, he says, you should not create a state where you have people belonging to different languages. You can't have a state in which you have Marathi speaking population, Gujarati speaking population, Tamil speaking population, and that mixed state is a very dangerous thing. It must be abandoned. That is why Babasaheb was against United Maharashtra. Second, Babasaheb says people speaking one language may be cut into many states. The best example is Telugu states. So Telugu people were cut into 2 states, Telangana and Andhra. Same language but 2 different states. So Babasaheb was like, you can cut cut such states into 1,000 states, no problem. But all people speaking the same language should not be clubbed into one big state. I was just referring to that. Babasaheb said, United Maharashtra that is why an absurdity. I was against United Maharashtra. He wanted Maharashtra but he divided into 4 states. We'll see when we do this. So he said a state must be created in such a manner that backward classes are protected. I'm using the word backward classes because Babasaheb in that book speaks not only about scheduled classes but also about Malis, Kolis, and other backward classes of Maharashtra and India. And Babasaheb says, in a linguistic state, what would remain for the smaller communities to look to? So what he was saying is to create a state randomly, arbitrarily, without any considerations. What is going to happen to the small communities? Can they hope to be elected to the legislature? Can they hope to maintain a place in the state service? Can they expect any attention to their economic betterment? In these circumstances, the creation of a linguistic state means the handing over of Swaraj to a communal majority. What an end to Mr. Gandhi's Swaraj. So Babasaheb says those who do not understand this aspect of the problem would understand it better if instead of speaking in the terms of linguistic state, we spoke of a Jat state or a Reddy state or a Maratha state. So don't create a state in such a manner, the already powerful communities would become even more powerful. Create a state in a manner that even the normal classes, the backward classes, can become the rulers. And that is why he said you need to transform the entire political system. In India today, what we follow is called as first past the post system. That means any candidate who gets majority votes will win the elections. Even if that candidate gets 33% votes, he will win the election. We saw many examples in Indian history where the candidate gets 33% or 24%, but still he or she wins the election. So a candidate who do not get 50% support ultimately gets into the legislature. How is it even representative of our democracy? So that's why Babasaheb says this system of first past the post must be replaced by what is called as cumulative voting. What happens in cumulative voting is that a candidate must get 50% votes to win the election. So this is more representative. This is more of a participatory democracy. And there are many other suggestions offered by Babasaheb in this book. So please see the book and you'll definitely get fascinated. And they're relevant even today. Say, for example, he was also speaking about the unequal powers of states in the Rajya Sabha. Say, for example, in the US, every state has equal representation in the Senate. Too, right? In India, that's not the case. The representation of states in the Rajya Sabha depends on population. That's why UP has so many seats. While, say, for example, smaller states like Sikkim have very less seats in Rajya Sabha. And that Babasaheb says this should not be the case. Every state must have an equal representation in the Rajya Sabha, and this is a very crucial issue even today because of the dominance of North over the South. Second, Babasaheb says in the Rajya Sabha what happens is Rajya Sabha has no strong power over the budget, and Babasaheb says this should be changed. Rajya Sabha should also have the equal power on the budget. Many other suggestions are there, so I'll deal with them. So this is what Babasaheb proposed on the division of states. He wanted UP to be divided into 3 states, Bihar into 2, Madhya Pradesh into 2, but Maharashtra into 4. He wanted it to be divided into 4 states. So he says that from the ancient times, Maharashtra has this Buddhist connection and Ashoka ruled it in 3 parts. So he says, what is the objection now to cut Maharashtra into 4? That was his point. And he says the Deccan Brahmins want Pune as the capital, while the present Madhya Pradesh Brahmins want Nagpur. Others suggest the third alternative of the legislature session being held alternatively at these 2 cities. I condemn all the 3. He is very different. He doesn't follow what others say. He has his own ideology, his own analysis of the problem. Babasaheb was very much scared of the fact that I'm sure that under the name of United Maharashtra, we're not calling Peshwai back. Don't create states in an abrupt manner. Do justice to the backward classes was his point. Of course, he also wanted Hyderabad to declare a second capital state. I'm going to skip it because it's going to be lengthy. One more interesting thing that Babasaheb says is we need a second capital for security reasons because he says, although India and China today are friends, how long the friendship would last, no one can definitely say. The possibility of conflict between India and China remains. In that event, if we take Calcutta as a capital, that would be useless. Babasaheb wrote these things in 1955, and we saw the disastrous India-China war in 1962. Look how prophetic he was. Jawaharlal Nehru did not listen to all these words of Babasaheb, and he faced the consequences. And then Babasaheb says the best capital one can have as a second capital is Hyderabad because of many different reasons. So you can see the book for those reasons. So now, 14th October 1946, as we know, Dr. Ambedkar led this extraordinary religious conversions I mean the world has ever seen. More than 7 lakh people got converted. He's the unchallenged mass leader. And know that on December 6th, Babasaheb Ambedkar passed away. His death. After his death, many books of Babasaheb was published. And the prominent among them were Dhamma, Riddles, publication of Dictionary of Pali and Pali grammar. And I'm just going to take 5 minutes. It's going to be over. Sorry for extending the session so much. So we'll see a brief understanding of Buddha and his Dhamma. I don't want to discuss detailedly about the book, but I'll tell you why Babasaheb wrote this book. Because there's this confusion among so many people, and they believe that Babasaheb wrote this book to give a small summary of the teachings of Buddha so that people can read. Because Pali literature is so extensive, it's impossible for everyone to read that extensive literature. So this is just a small summary of that. This is a very, very, very wrong assumption. I'll tell you why. Babasaheb begins by saying there are difficulties in understanding the true message of the Buddha. He says, what are the teachings of the Buddha? This is a question on which no followers of the Buddha or the students of Buddhism agree. To some, Samadhi is its principal teaching. To some, it is Vipassana. To some, Buddhism is esoteric. To others, it is exoteric. To some, it's a system of bad and metaphysics. To some, it is sheer mysticism. To some, it is a selfish abstraction from the world. To some, it is a systematic repression of every impulse and emotion of the heart. Many other views regarding Buddhism could be collected. This divergence of views is astonishing, isn't it? Everyone tells their own opinion on Buddhism. Now, what is the truth? Babasaheb says, indeed, it would not be an exaggeration to say that of all the founders of religions in the world, the presentation of the life and teachings of the founder of Buddhism presents a problem which is quite puzzling, not baffling. Why do we have this confusion? Reasons for this confusion. Babasaheb says, what the Buddha preached was heard by his audience, which largely consisted of the bhikkhus. It is the bhikkhus who reported to the people at large what the Buddha had said on any particular matter. The art of writing had not yet developed. The bhikkhus had therefore to memorize what they had heard. Not every bhikkhu cared to memorize what he had heard, but there were some who made it their profession to memorize, and they were called as banakas. So there were some special people called banakas who used to note all these things. And the Buddhist canonical literature is as vast as ocean. To memorize all this was indeed a great feat. In reporting the Buddha, it has always been found that he was being misreported. Many cases of misreporting had been brought to the knowledge of Buddha while he was alive. This is a very interesting point because many people believe that all these new things were added after the death of Buddha. But Babasaheb says even when Buddha was alive, there were cases where his teachings were misreported. And this was brought to the attention of Buddha. And then Babasaheb says, the cases of misreporting are common with regard to karma and rebirth. These doctrines have also a place in the Brahminic religion. Consequently, it was easy for the Bhanakas to incorporate the Brahminic tenets into the Buddhist religion. These are new things were added into the Buddhist religion. One has therefore to be very careful in accepting what is said in the Buddhist canonical literature as being the word of Buddha. Now, this is a very scary situation because everywhere there is confusion. In this context, how can we distinguish the true teachings of Buddha from the distorted ones? Pali literature is very vast. How can anyone do that? But thankfully, for us, Babasaheb has done this task. So if you consider this water as a mixture of the true Buddhist teachings and also all the accretions and distortions, Babasaheb's Buddha and his Dhamma is like a sieve that filter the true teachings of Buddha. So this is the reason why he wrote this book, because there's so much confusion about what is the real message of Buddhism. So if you read his book, you'll understand the true message of Buddhism. He did not write this book to give a summary of the teachings. That is one of the aspects, but the real intention was to present the real teachings of Buddhism, because all across the world, the teachings of Buddha got distorted. So he had to represent the true teachings. They wrote this book. It's called as Buddha and his Dhamma. After the death of Babasaheb, many prominent Buddhists reached out to Indian Buddhists, our people, and say, for example, Dr. D.T. Suzuki is a very prominent Japanese expert on Buddhism. He came to Milan College, met our people, and he had extraordinary admiration for Dr. Ambedkar. Similarly, we see this extraordinary person called as Walpolo Rahulathera, who is a very famous Sri Lankan monk and was one of the earliest Buddhist preachers to teach in foreign universities about Buddhism. So he came to Siddharth College and gave a talk on Babasaheb's Buddha and his Dhamma, which he said Dr. Ambedkar's Buddha and his Dhamma is the biggest revolutionary text. This is the extraordinary significance of Babasaheb's book. And I thank Dr. Prakash Tupe sir for sharing all these amazing pictures and information. And finally, we're going to conclude. So we know so far we have seen Babasaheb's expertise on different topics. But how many of us know that Dr. Ambedkar was also a lexicographer? He's a man who wrote a dictionary. So Babasaheb had actually written a Pali English dictionary. And the interesting fact is, people usually refer to this great person called Samuel Johnson, who is credited with the publication of modern English dictionary. But Dr. Ambedkar is 1,000 times superior to this man, because when Samuel Johnson wrote this dictionary of English language, most of the words were already spoken by the native public of the time. So it's easy for him to gather all the words from common public, from the existing literature. But that's not the case with Pali, because Pali by that time was already a dead language. So Babasaheb had actually went deep into the entire Pali literature, collected all those rare words, compiled them in a single place, translated them into English, and wrote a dictionary. And he started this exercise when he was 54, 55. So you can see he was very old. He was suffering with so many health issues. He was occupied with social and political movements, drafting constitution, so many things. Still, he took the time to write this extraordinary, majestic Pali English dictionary. And if writing dictionary is not enough, Babasaheb takes the next step. He translates that dictionary to 4 languages. As you can see here, this is Pali, this is English, this is Marathi, this is Gujarati, this is Hindi. You get blown away. I mean, all these words, whatever I'm saying about Babasaheb in his books, it's truly an understatement. We have to read those books to understand the magnanimity of those books. It's easy to say that Mount Everest is the highest mountain or peak in the world. But if you climb Mount Everest, you'll understand the height at which it is located. Similarly, if you read the works of Babasaheb, only then you'll understand fascinating wisdom he has had. Again, he had also written books on Pali grammar. So besides writing books on Pali language and grammar, he had also written books which are unfinished, like Untouchables of the Children of India's Ghetto, Christianizing the Untouchables, and so on. He even planned to write his own autobiography or to write a biography of Maharaja Sayajirao Gaikwad, whom he called, the architect of his fortune. He also wanted to write a biography of Mahatma Phule. He started writing some of these things, but he left them unfinished. We can understand. And he also wanted to write a book on history of Indian Army, because Dr. Ambedkar's father and grandfathers, even Ramai's parents and grandparents were in the army. So his entire family was in the army. So he has this very strong understanding of Indian Army. And if you actually read Pakistan at Partition, there is a separate chapter on Indian Army. It is a fascinating thing. So he wanted to write a different book on Indian Army, but he could not write them. He said that even today, there are 30 volumes of his writings that are yet to be published. Whatever we are reading so far, it's just the content of 22 volumes. We have more than 30 volumes that are yet to be published. So imagine the kind of research, the kind of wisdom we have shared in those books. Again, as I said, he has written many books like Philosophy of Hinduism, Revolution, Counter-Revolution, Riddles in Hinduism. But I don't want to discuss these books today because of a very interesting reason. Dr. Ambedkar's thought process on religion is a very complex subject. I was discussing this with my friend, and when I completed the basics, it took me 2 hours. So even if you want to touch the basics, it takes so much of time. Because Dr. Ambedkar has a very different understanding of religion. So he defines religion. He makes a contrast with theology. He says religion and theology are different. He defines different types of theologies. He compares religion and science. And he gives you the evolutionary picture of religion. And there's so many things. Again, one of the mistakes that many people commit is that they highlight the criticism of Hinduism, which Dr. Ambedkar did, undoubtedly true. But he was also very critical on other religions like Islam, on Christianity. Even on Parsi religion, he was very critical. So if you want to understand Dr. Ambedkar's view on religion in a holistic manner, you need to present all these things. You can't simply present one thing and ignore the other. You have to present all these things. It is going to take so much of time. That's why I am not going into these books. So, and secondly, they are also a bit unfinished. So still, you can read those books to understand Dr. Ambedkar's impeccable understanding of religion. So, conclusion, I'm going to conclude now. Simple question. Why do we need to read the works of Babasaheb? I want to remind you quote of Babasaheb. He says, those who do not know history cannot make history. As I said, our histories are obfuscated, our identities are erased. In this context, if you want to know the true history, you have to read Babasaheb. There is no other option. You have to read Babasaheb, you have to read Mahatma Jyotiba. This is the first reason. And secondly, there is also one more important reason. I want to show a very interesting story. As the chief architect of Indian Constitution, Dr. Ambedkar did everything that he could do to ensure the rights of most depressed classes in the community. The world has ever seen. He could have taken rest. Writing a constitution or authoring a constitution is the greatest thing an individual can do. He did that. He could take rest. But he did not do all those things. After finishing the drafting of Indian Constitution, many doctors and well-wishers advised Dr. to take rest because his health was in very bad condition. He was suffering with diabetes, hypertension, neuritis. I was reading the book of Dr. Sairam Ambedkar. It tears because Dr. Ambedkar had to suffer so much. He could not sleep for 3 days, 4 days continuously. Still, he was working. We need to understand all these things. He could have taken rest. He could have stopped doing all these works. He could have just taken rest. But why did he take the risk, risking his own life to write all these books? This is a question that we need to ask. He could have obliged to the request of doctors, his wife, Dr. Savita, and others, but he did not. And after 1951, he actually began writing new books with an increased enthusiasm, even though his health was not good condition. So he began writing books like Revolutionary Counter-Revolution, Realism in Hinduism, Chinese Dhamma, and many more. The cost of his valuable. If you look at the pictures of Babasaheb in this last phase, we'll get emotional. Why did Babasaheb Ambedkar sacrifice his valuable health to write the books? He has already sacrificed so much, but still he was not satisfied. You look at this picture of Babasaheb. Look at this picture. I don't want to create a scene of emotion and something like that, but I want to show, we need to understand. If you see my previous slides, we have these dashing pictures of Babasaheb. He became so ill, so frail in his health. Why did he do this? We need to understand this. This is a question that we need to ponder about with serious attention. In this context, is it not our responsibility to spend at least 30 minutes of our daily life reading the works of our emancipator Babasaheb? This is a question that we need to ask. I see some people online don't want to criticize anyone. People are reading Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Marx, many other people. Great, please read them. No one is saying don't read them. But what about our Babasaheb? Who has sacrificed so much for our community, for our people of India, for the greatness and equality, liberty, fraternity, the peace of the world. Why are we not spending even a small amount of time to read his books? He's done so much for us. This is the question that we need to ask. This is a question that we need to ponder daily. Commit ourselves to do something, to read his works. That is my earnest appeal. I don't know if my entire presentation made sense or not, but I just wanted to convey the small thing that please read his works. They're very readily available. You can't complain because we have this fascinating site, baws.in. You need not to go to Maharashtra. If I want to tell my story, I could not get all those books, so I visited Pune to buy the books. But that is not the case now. You can find all these volumes digitalized, available very nicely. One website called baws.in. Of course, you have other websites of Government of India and other, but I personally don't like them, not properly arranged. But if you visit this website, baws.in, find all the volumes of books are neatly arranged, and you have this fascinating search option. If you want to search something in the writings of Babasaheb, say for example, what did Babasaheb say or talk about Darwin, Charles Darwin? You can type Charles Darwin, you find them different. This is a fascinating tool. We need to use this technology to read the works of Babasaheb. And this is my earnest appeal to all the friends who have taken their valuable time to attend this lecture. So in case if you're wondering where to start, because you have 22 volumes of Babasaheb, where do I start? In case you are wondering or worrying about that, I suggest you to read this chapter called A Warning to the Untouchables. In my opinion, this chapter summarizes the entire philosophy of Babasaheb in his own words. If you want to begin, read this chapter called A Warning to the Untouchables. It's present in the volume 5 of BAWS, and you'll love the writings of him. Finally, Dr. Ambedkar's final message, putting it here. He says, if there is any one lesson that you must learn from my life, it is this, that I have never disowned my community. I have been proud in sharing their happiness and misery all throughout my life. Will continue to do so. This message must resonate each and every one of us. Because even today, our people are suffering and subjected to ignominies of the worst sort. Don't want to go into that, but you know those things. We see these things every day. So it's high time that we read his works to understand our history, to fight the present injustice, and to build an egalitarian future. That's why we need to read Babasaheb, Mahatma Phule. And thank you so much for listening patiently to this lecture. I don't know what I conveyed, but my appeal again to please read the books of Babasaheb. That is what I wanted to convey. So thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. Charan sir, Prashant Bhai, Anil sir, Sandeep Bhai, PWS.in team, Dr. Ambedkar's International Circle. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you so much.
I'm at a loss of words, Dr. Sairam. Is there a virtual version of a standing ovation that we all can give to you? That is something like this. I have never heard. I've attended so many sessions growing up in India, here in the States, from a lot of Ambedkar scholars, but something like this I have never come across. Thank you, and blue salute to you, brother.
Thank you, man.
I'm so pleasantly surprised to hear what Prashant Bhai posted. That's just 26 years of age. You started your journey 7 years ago, and with so much depth and understanding, it's extraordinary. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
What I would like to now quickly do is